Nearly 14,000 years ago, as the last great ice sheets began their slow retreat, the land that would become New York City emerged from beneath the frozen silence. It was a raw and untamed place, a tundra scattered with spruce and fir in the chill of the waning ice age. Great beasts roamed here then. Woolly mammoths and mastodons lumbered through the cold forests, accompanied by herds of caribou and elk, and even creatures like wild horses and giant beavers now long extinct. In the wake of these animals came bands of Paleo-Indian hunters, the first people to tread this new ground. We can imagine them venturing cautiously across wind-swept plains and glacial moraines, wrapped in furs against the lingering cold, following the tracks of game into a virgin landscape. By around 11,000 years ago, at the very end of the Pleistocene, humans had reached the New York region. Sea levels were still so low that one could walk on dry land from what is now Manhattan across to Staten Island, and the broad lower Hudson was a rushing meltwater river valley teeming with life. In this vast open world, the first New Yorkers found a hunter's paradise unfolding at the dawn of a warmer age. For these early peoples, life moved with the seasons and the herds. They lived lightly on the land, in small kinship groups that traversed great ranges to find food and shelter. In winter, they sought refuge in wooded highlands or rock shelters, hunting caribou or taking shelter from icy winds. In summer, they might camp by rivers and coasts, fishing the waters and gathering wild plants when game grew scarce. They carried their world on their backs, crafting tools from stone, bone, and wood to carve out an existence amid nature's abundance. A sharp, fluted spear point of the Paleo-Indian style, long buried under what is now urban ground, stands as a silent witness to their presence. Archaeologists in the 1950s unearthed just such a leaf-shaped point in Manhattan, proof that those ancient hunters once stalked prey where skyscrapers now rise. Perhaps one of those hunters stood on a hill overlooking a swamp where giant mastodons wallowed, hefting a spear napped from flint. We know that mastodon roamed this land because their remains have been found beneath the Harlem River and in northern Manhattan, hinting at dramatic encounters between humans and beast. In the depths of an ancient winter, a family might have huddled around a fire of spruce logs, its flames mirrored in eyes bright with stories of creation, of animals and spirits, echoing under the crystal night sky. Though we have no written record of these first New Yorkers, their stone tools and the bones of their prey speak across the ages, telling us of a people finely attuned to the rhythms of a primeval world. As millennia passed, the great ice retreated further north and the climate warmed. The once open spruce parklands transformed into dense deciduous forests, much like those of today, filled with oak, hickory, and chestnut by about 4,000 years ago. The rivers and coasts rose with melting glaciers, reshaping the land. The narrow strait we now call the Narrows filled with sea, dividing Staten Island from Long Island, and ocean tides spilled into the harbor's bays. But the people adapted gracefully to these changes. The Paleo-Indian way of life slowly evolved into what archaeologists call the archaic culture, roughly 7,000 to 1,000 BC. In this warmer world, the descendants of the first hunters broadened their diet and skills. The great megafauna gradually vanish into legend, but in their place the forests offered new bounty. Deer and black bear roamed among the thickets, waterfowl nested in marshes, and streams brimmed with fish. The archaic peoples became expert foragers. In spring they gathered fresh greens and speared spawning salmon in clear streams. In summer They collected blueberries on wooded slopes and trapped eels in shallow creeks. Along the seashores, families feasted on the abundance of shellfish now available in estuaries warmed by the Holocene sun. To this day, ancient shell middens, mounds of oyster and clam shells discarded long ago, are found on Staten Island, in the Bronx, and along the Harlem River, tangible proof of communal feasts by the water's edge. These quiet piles of shells and charcoal are like time capsules, revealing that by this era people knew well how to harvest the sea's riches, eating clams by the fire as the waves lapped the shore. With the land's transformation came new ways of living. The nomadic bands of earlier times began to revisit favorite campsites year after year, and some places became seasonal hamlets where people might return every autumn or spring. Over thousands of years, these early New Yorkers innovated and diversified their skills. Archaeologists find many different site types from this period. Fishing camps perched by river rapids in spring, open air camps on hilltops for autumn deer hunts, rock shelters in the highlands for winter protection, and quarry sites where toolmakers pried chunks of flint and jasper from stone outcrops. The toolkit of these people expanded in variety and sophistication. We find not only spear points and knives, but also stone net sinkers for fishing nets, heavy grooved axes to fell trees, and grinding stones to pulverize nuts and seeds. They wove ropes from plant fiber, tanned hides for clothing, and shaped wood into utensils. Though such perishable inventions only survive in rare archaeological traces, from time to time they also honored their dead in ways we are only beginning to understand. A burial pit here or there, with red ochre sprinkled over the bones, suggests a spiritual life tied to the earth and cycles of renewal. By the late Archaic, the people of the region had established deep roots, connecting waterways and woodlands into a sprawling network of travel and trade. We can imagine families paddling dugout canoes along the Hudson River, perhaps exchanging furs or seashells for obsidian or copper from far-off places, expanding their world even as they remained in tune with their home terrain. Each generation taught the next which valleys had the sweetest water, where chestnuts could be gathered by the bushel in autumn, and how to read the clouds for coming storms. In this way, knowledge passed down like an oral tapestry, rich with experience and memory, tying the people intimately to the land that sustained them. In time, subtle shifts in technology and society ushered in the woodland period. After roughly 1000 BC, the people of the region began to shape clay into pottery, baking the clay by the fire to create sturdy vessels. We can imagine a quiet morning by a riverside encampment as a potter pressed zigzag patterns into wet clay with a carved stick, perhaps decorating a pot that would store dried fish for winter. This simple invention, the clay pot, marked a turning point, allowing food to be kept for longer and meals to be cooked more efficiently. With pottery came the capacity to boil soups and stews, to render fat from bones, to store surplus grains or smoked meat safe from moisture. Around the same time, people began to cultivate the first garden plots in these lands. They domesticated native plants like goosefoot, sumpweed, and sunflowers, and tended patches of squash that had slowly spread north from earlier farming cultures to the south. For countless generations they had gathered wild gourds and seeds. Now they intentionally sowed and harvested, slowly moving toward horticulture. By the first Millennium AD, maize, corn, originally domesticated in distant Mesoamerica, finally reached the northeast, likely carried along trade routes and planted in the fertile floodplains by New York's early farmers. They learned to grow corn in small hills of soil, alongside beans that twined up the corn stalks and squash that shaded the ground below. These three crops together would later be known as the Three Sisters, revered as sacred gifts in the stories of the native people. The addition of agriculture did not immediately replace the old ways. People still hunted deer and caught fish and gathered wild berries, but it enhanced their food security and allowed populations to grow. By around 800 AD, archaeological evidence shows villages becoming larger and more permanent. We picture such a village on a late summer afternoon, a cluster of round houses with frames of sapling and bark set near a river bend, fields of corn and squash stretching under the sun, children chasing each other between the huts, while elders sit in the shade, grinding corn or fashioning arrowheads from stone. These communities were still small by modern standards, perhaps a few dozen families, but they marked the blossoming of a more settled life, rooted in particular landscapes passed down through generations. Across the Hudson Valley and the coastal plain, the archaeological records speaks to a long, unbroken chain of human presence, connecting those first Paleo-Indian hunters to the later woodland villagers. At West Athens Hill in the Hudson Valley, traces of some of the earliest camps date back 13,000 years, while on the banks of the Delaware and Susquehanna rivers we find ancient arrowheads and fireplaces from every millennium in between. On Long Island and in the highlands north of the city, stone tools turned up by ploughs hint at long-ago hunts in forests, now turned to suburbs. All told, by the end of this prehistoric era, a rich tapestry of cultures have flourished in the region. Each wave of innovation, better tools, new foods, changing social bonds, was woven into that tapestry rather than replacing it. The people remembered the old ways even as they adopted the new. They still honored the spirits of the forests and waters, still moved between summer shore and winter forest in many cases, even as some settled in villages year-round. And over time, distinct tribes and languages began to form, differentiating this long-settled region into new cultural identities. By the late woodland period, around 1500 AD, the inhabitants of what is now the New York City area were part of a broad family of Algonquian-speaking peoples. Their ancestors had likely migrated into the area centuries before, mixing with local tribes and establishing dominance along the shores and river valleys. These people would come to be known as the Lenape, or original people, in their language, the nation who greeted the first European explorers generations later. They knew this land so intimately that every hill and brook had a name in their tongue. Every plant and creature played a role in their lore. In their dialect, one large island in the harbor was called Manhattan, Island of Many Hills, a name that still echoes today. And so, before the first recorded histories, New York was already alive with human hopes, fears, and dreams. Long before the rise of cities, before the Lenape would lend their names to rivers and islands, there were countless lives lived in tune with the rhythm of the seasons in this place. We are left with only fragments of those lives. A charcoal stain in the soil where a fire once crackled, the curve of a broken spear point, heaps of shucked oyster shells by an ancient beach, or a footprint lost to time along a muddy shore. Yet from these fragments, a vision emerges of an enduring relationship between people and the land. The first inhabitants of the New York City region were not mere wanderers passing through. They adapted to each twist and turn of environmental change, endured through hardship and joy, and thrived in their own right. In the whisper of wind through old oak branches, or the crash of ocean waves on rock, one might imagine the echoes of their laughter, their psalms, and their prayers to the earth. This long prelude of human history set the stage for everything to come. It cultivated the soil of memory and experience from which the Lenape, the people of the island of many hills, would later draw their strength and identity. Now, as we turn to the story of the Lenape themselves, we remember that their roots sink deep into this ancient ground, a ground hallowed by the footsteps of thousands of years of human journeying, stretching back to the very end of the Ice Age. The Lenape would inherit a land already rich with stories, a land shaped by those who came before, whose legacy endures in every stone and every brook of old New York. And in knowing this, we step gently into the next chapter. Lenape Origins, Island of Many Hills. In the quiet darkness before dawn, the island that will become Manhattan lies under a canopy of stars. A gentle mist rises from countless streams and marshes, shrouding the oak and hickory forests in a silvery haze. This land is home to the Lenape people, who have lived here for generations in harmony with nature. They know the island as Manhattan, meaning the island of many hills, a sacred place of wooded highlands and fertile hollows. In the pre-dawn stillness, you can almost hear the soft footsteps of Lenape hunters on footpaths that cut through the thickets, trails that one day will become the streets of New York. As the sun's first light gilds the eastern sky, the Lenape begin their day. Along the shore, dugout canoes glide through the calm waters of the Hudson River, their paddles silently parting the glassy surface. Families gather by the riverbanks, catching fish and collecting oysters, the briny smell of the bay mixing with wood smoke from morning fires. Inland, small plots of corn, beans, and squash grow in clearings, cultivated by Lenape women using slash and burn techniques. Deer move quietly among the trees until a hunter's arrow flies, its whisper the only sign of the swift moment. Nature's abundance is all around, salmon splashing upstream, flocks of birds calling from the wetlands, and berries ripening in the understory. Broadway, today a busy avenue, began as one of these meandering trails, a well-trod path through the wilderness. On warm evenings, children laugh and chase fireflies in the meadows as elders tell stories by the fire. Overhead, the night sky is brilliant and clear. The Lenape live by the rhythms of the seasons, observing the migrations of birds and the cycles of the moon. For thousands of years, their villages dot the area. Historians estimate around 5,000 Lenape in some 80 settlements live in the region by the early 1600s. In this era, time itself seems to flow as gently as the great river. The Hudson carries the Lenape's canoes and dreams, unhurried and eternal, towards the sea. It is a world of balance and tranquility, where the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of wind in the cedar trees are the loudest sounds at night. The island sleeps peacefully under the stars, awaiting the changes that a new day and new people will bring. In the soft first light, a change approaches on the horizon, like a new current stirring the bay. The Lenape watch as unfamiliar sails appear far out on the water, white against the morning sky, heralding the dawn of a new era. It is the early 17th century, and the stillness of the Lenape's world is broken by the billowing sails of European ships. In 1609, an English captain in Dutch service, Henry Hudson, navigates his ship into New York Bay. The half-moon glides past the verdant shores, and Hudson marvels at the dense forests and the plentiful wildlife, especially the beavers whose pelts are as good as gold in European markets. His reports echo across the Atlantic, and soon Dutch traders arrive, drawn by the promise of rich fur trade. The smell of salt and new timber fills the air as a tiny Dutch settlement takes root at the island's southern tip. By 1624, several Dutch families have landed on a small island off Manhattan, Governor's Island today, and begun building Fort Amsterdam on Manhattan itself. The harbour bustles with activity now, the creak of wooden hulls, the shouts of sailors unloading goods, and the ever-present cry of seabirds overhead. Under the Dutch, the settlement grows into New Amsterdam, a nascent town nestled between river and harbour. Low, gabled rooftops of wood and brick rise where once only trees stood. On muddy lanes like today's Pearl Street, you'd see traders bartering beaver pelts, grain, and tools. A windmill turns slowly in the breeze, grinding grain into flour, while cattle graze just outside the fort's walls. The air carries new scents: smoked fish from the docks, fresh bread from communal ovens, and the tang of wood smoke curling from stone chimneys. Men and women in simple Dutch attire go about their day at an unhurried pace, their voices speaking Dutch, French, English, and a dozen other tongues. For even in its infancy, New Amsterdam is a diverse little outpost. By the 1640s, its population includes not only Dutch, but also Germans, Scandinavians, Jews from Brazil, and Africans, some free, many enslaved. In fact, the Dutch West India Company has begun importing enslaved African people to labor in the colony. They toil on building projects like the defensive wooden wall along the town's northern edge, where Wall Street gets its name. Life here is fragile and often harsh, but a community is taking shape, one defined by commerce and a spirit of enterprise. In the center of town stands the fort and the church, where Director General Peter Stuyvesant, peg-legged, stern, and clad in black, leads prayers on Sundays. Stuyvesant arrived in 1647 to govern the colony, and his firm leadership, sometimes autocratic, brings a measure of order. Imagine him stomping down the dirt streets with his wooden leg thumping, scolding tavern keepers for selling on the Sabbath, or admonishing citizens to keep their pigs from roaming free. Under Stuyvesant's watch, New Amsterdam's first city tavern opens, as does a school and a market. By lamplight in the evenings, families gather around hearths inside their crooked houses, while outside the palisade walls, the deep forests and marshes remain eerily quiet. Sometimes the distant howl of a wolf or the song of crickets drifts over the ramparts, reminding the townsfolk of the wilderness that still surrounds them. Not all is peaceful on this colonial frontier. Tensions occasionally flare between the Dutch and the Lenape, who have seen their lands encroached. In the 1640s, mistrust and competition over trade lead to violent conflicts like Kieft's War, shattering the quiet with the thunder of muskets. By day, plumes of smoke rise on the horizon from devastated villages. By night, the settlers keep watch, the usual stillness punctured by distant cries. Eventually, a fragile truce is reached, and the rhythms of daily life resume. But these events linger like a distant storm cloud. New Amsterdam perseveres and even prospers in a modest way, a tiny foothold of Europe in a vast native land. By the early 1660s, about 1,500 Europeans and a few hundred Africans live here, clustered in homes and farms on Lower Manhattan. They continue to trade with local tribes and with other colonies, sending out ships laden with furs, timber, and tobacco. A walk through New Amsterdam in 1664 would reveal a town still very much in tune with nature's cycles despite its growing urban character. In spring, pear trees bloom along what will later be Pearl Street. In summer, children splash in the shallow ponds and collect berries, Come autumn, the forests beyond the wall blaze with colour, and colonists and Lenape alike harvest corn and squash from the gardens. During winter's hush, the harbour may freeze in parts, and skaters glide on the collect pond north of town. The motif of water is ever present. The North River, Hudson, on one side, the East River on the other, and the network of streams and inlets crisscrossing the island. The tides lap gently at the shore under the watch of the fort's cannons. Over this young, polyglot community flies the blue, white, and orange flag of the Dutch Republic, at least for now. In late summer of 1664, change arrives with little warning. One morning, residents awaken to see the ominous silhouettes of English warships anchored off Staten Island. 4 English frigates, sent by the Duke of York, have sailed in and demand the surrender of New Amsterdam. With defences weak and the prospect of battle threatening the town, Stuyvesant grudgingly capitulates. Without a shot, the English take control and in 1665 rename the settlement New York in honour of the Duke of York. The Union Jack is raised over Fort Amsterdam, promptly renamed Fort James, and the era of Dutch rule quietly ends. For the townsfolk, life goes on much the same the next day. Merchants still sell their wares, farmers still milk their cows. But the flags have changed, and with them the course of history. The days of New Amsterdam give way to New York. The Hudson's tides continue to flow regardless of who governs on its banks. As the sun sets on the Dutch period, one can hear the distant plop of horse hooves on cobblestones and the creak of wagon wheels, as an English chapter begins under the same wide sky. Under the British Crown, the little port town flourishes steadily. By the early 1700s, New York has grown from a rough frontier outpost into a bustling colonial town. Red brick and brownstone buildings replace many old wooden Dutch houses, lining the narrow, winding lanes. The sounds of English now dominate the markets and taverns, though the polyglot character remains. One can still hear Dutch prayers in the Reformed Church, African languages in the market, and Lenape words in the names of places. The Union Jack flutters from the ramparts of the fort, and King George's portrait hangs in the Assembly Hall. The footsteps of British soldiers now echo along the fort's walls at night as they patrol, their lanterns swinging and casting dancing shadows on the darkened streets. New York in the 1700s is a town of merchants and shipwrights, of tavern keepers and craftsmen. The harbour is the heart of it all. By day, ships from Europe, the Caribbean, and other colonies crowd the wharves. Sailors unload goods like sugar, molasses, tea, and manufactured wares, while loading up barrels of New York's farm produce and furs for the return voyages. The smell of tar, rope, and salted fish permeates the dockside. Nearby, the outcry of merchants haggling and seagulls squabbling over scraps creates a lively din. Pearl Street hosts an open-air market where farmers from Long Island and up the Hudson sell fruits, vegetables, and meats. The city's population is rising, reaching about 6,000 by 1690 and continuing upward, making it one of the largest towns in the American colonies, though still behind Boston and Philadelphia for now. By 1700, the Lenape presence within the town has dwindled to only a handful, their population decimated and villages mostly displaced. In their stead, peoples from across the Atlantic arrive, not just the English, but French Huguenots, Scotch-Irish, and others seeking opportunity. Amid this growth, a darker aspect of colonial life persists: slavery. Enslaved Africans are a significant part of the town's labour force under British rule, just as under the Dutch. They work as house servants, dock workers, coachmen, and skilled artisans. By the 1740s, about 20% of New York's population is enslaved, one of the highest proportions in the colonies. In the evenings, one might see groups of these men and women quietly congregating in the yards behind their masters' homes, sharing stories or whispers of hope under the quiet sky. Sometimes they sing soft songs of sorrow and resilience, their voices mingling with the gentle night sounds of the city. The practice of slavery lays a cruel backdrop to the city's prosperity, an unsettling undercurrent beneath the otherwise cheerful colonial life. As the decades pass, New York becomes more important and cosmopolitan. Grand homes are built along Broadway, and trim gardens adorn them with roses and tulips in spring. The first newspapers begin printing. In 1725, the New York Gazette rolls off a press, spreading news and ideas. By the 1730s, the city even has a theatre for plays and concerts, and intellectual clubs meet in coffee houses lit by flickering candles. On autumn Sundays, the peal of church bells rings out over the rooftops, from Trinity Church near the tip of Manhattan to the chapels in outlying areas, calling the faithful to worship. At night, oil lamps and candles glow in windows, but the streets themselves are mostly dark, save for the lanterns carried by the few night watchmen who call out the hours. Now and then a shout or laughter spills from a riverside tavern where sailors drink rum punch and sing sea shanties, but elsewhere the city sleeps in relative quiet, the distant sound of waves lapping at the piers on the East River lulling the town to rest. New York's spirit is increasingly one of commerce and youthful ambition. The economy thrives on the triangular trade. New York sends flour, biscuits, and timber to the Caribbean. In return comes sugar and molasses to be made into rum or goods from England. Local craftsmen, blacksmiths, silversmiths, cobblers, fill growing needs. By mid-century, the city is sometimes nicknamed the Empire City for its wealth, foreshadowing its destiny. Yet, even as it grows richer, it remains a town of contrasts. Elegant mansions exist alongside crowded alleys where labourers and the poor live. In the unpaved streets, pigs still roam freely, acting as colonial garbage disposals, and wooden wagons rattle by. Near the Commons, today's City Hall Park, public hangings and markets occur, and on winter days one might see a crowd gathered on a frozen pond for impromptu skating. Life is not easy. Fires occasionally sweep through the wooden buildings, and diseases like smallpox strike from time to time. But the city carries on, hardy and hopeful. By the 1760s, however, the winds of change begin to stir in the colonies. New York, like Boston and Philadelphia, becomes a hotbed of talk about liberty and the rights of Englishmen in America. The British Parliament's taxes and trade restrictions, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, are deeply unpopular. In 1765, delegates from several colonies gather in New York for the Stamp Act Congress, the first collective colonial action against Britain. By day, pamphlets and newspapers spread revolutionary ideas. By night, groups like the Sons of Liberty meet in secret in taverns lit by candlelight, plotting resistance. They erect a liberty pole in the city as a symbol of defiance, and each time British soldiers tear it down, the patriots raise it again. Tension simmers. On the muddy streets, arguments break out between colonists and red-coated soldiers quartered in town. A sense of something inevitable hangs in the air, much like the heavy stillness before a summer thunderstorm. On a cold day in January or a warm evening in May, New Yorkers still go about their usual routines. The baker sells his bread, The blacksmith hammers at the forge. Children play in the churchyard. Yet there's an undercurrent of uncertainty. Change is coming. Stand at the battery at the island's tip, and you might gaze out to the harbour to see more ships arriving. Not just merchant sloops, but men of war carrying British troops. By 1775, as news of battles in Massachusetts, Lexington and Concord electrifies the colonies, New York bristles with both loyalists and patriots, neighbors eyeing each other warily. The city is like a powder keg, the footsteps of marching soldiers growing more frequent in its streets. Still, on a summer night you may hear not war, but the familiar chorus of crickets, the gentle roll of waves, and the creak of ships at anchor. New York's last quiet before the storm. Then, in the summer of 1776, the storm breaks. Distant cannon fire booms beyond the horizon on Long Island, and the Revolutionary War engulfs New York. The tranquil nights of the colonial city are about to be replaced by the fire and tumult of conflict. It is late summer 1776. The warm air over New York carries the acrid smell of gunpowder and the distant clamour of battle. General George Washington and the Continental Army have arrived to defend the city, but after a crushing defeat at the Battle of Long Island in August, the Patriots are in retreat. Picture a dawn where the sky is smudged with smoke from cannon fire. In the narrow streets of Manhattan, families huddle indoors as musket shots echo from afar. Washington's troops slip up the west side of Manhattan after a losing fight, the general himself scanning anxiously across the Hudson from Harlem Heights as enemy forces close in. By September 1776, New York City falls to the British redcoat soldiers march down Broadway and plant the Union Jack once more at Fort George, the old Fort Amsterdam. The American rebels withdraw north and across the rivers, leaving the city in British hands for the duration of the war. Under occupation, New York becomes a British military stronghold and a refuge for loyalists, colonists still faithful to the crown. The once lively port now bristles with warships at anchor, their masts a forest of spars and sails. Military barracks sprout on the commons, and the streets fill with British regiments drilling by day. Drums and fifes playing martial tunes replace the chatter of merchants. By night, the city is under curfew. Only patrols of British soldiers and loyalist militiamen walk the dark lanes, their boots and the occasional neigh of a horse the dominant sounds in the otherwise silent town. Many houses stand empty, patriot owners having fled, their windows dark and gardens overgrown. Other buildings teem with new inhabitants. British officers quartered in the finest homes, and makeshift prisons crowded with captured American soldiers. Tragically, the hulls of rotting ships anchored off Brooklyn in Wallabout Bay serve as horrific prison ships for thousands of captives. Their suffering and deaths on those dark, bobbing jails far exceed the American losses in battle. The East River carries the mournful legacy of those souls each day as its tides ebb and flow. One night in September 1776, a great fire breaks out and rages through the city, consuming a quarter of its buildings. Flames paint the sky crimson and orange, and bucket brigades form desperately to stop the blaze. The inferno leaves behind smouldering ruins from the foot of Broad Street to the northern outskirts. In the following days, the smell of charred wood and ash lingers, and blackened chimneys stand like tombstones in the burned districts. Both the British and the Patriots accuse each other of setting the fire intentionally, and distrust deepens. Through these hardships, ordinary New Yorkers endure as best they can. Some open shops to serve British troops. Taverns fill with the redcoats' laughter and songs on occasion, trying to forget the war's brutalities. But many civilians suffer shortages of food and fuel, and the winters are especially cruel. In quieter moments, a walk by the Hudson might offer a semblance of normalcy. The river still freezes at its edges, snow still falls softly on the Battery, and perhaps a child still finds delight in catching snowflakes outside their doorstep. The city's natural rhythms persist even in wartime. The sun rises and sets. The moon waxes and wanes over streets that have known both peace and conflict. Through the long years of the Revolution, New York remains firmly under British control, a center for command and a safe harbor for loyalist refugees fleeing rebel areas. But by 1783, the war's tide has turned elsewhere. The British surrender at Yorktown, and peace negotiations begin. Finally, on November 25, 1783, a day New Yorkers celebrate as Evacuation Day, the British Army pulls out of the city. As the last redcoat soldiers file onto ships in the harbor, General George Washington triumphantly rides into Manhattan at the head of his Continental soldiers. Church bells peal joyously and crowds cheer, waving flags of the new United States. It is a bright, cold day. Some accounts say that British pranksters nailed the Union Jack atop a greased flagpole at Battery Park as a final act of mischief, and eager patriots scrambled to replace it with the Stars and Stripes. The city that has endured 7 years of occupation now exudes hope and relief. In the glow of late autumn afternoon, Washington and his officers dine at Fraunces Tavern, toasting the victory and the dawn of independence. That night, New York is aglow with celebration. Candles in windows, fireworks, small and crackling, in the streets, and for the first time in years, the city's laughter and song ring free. As the festivities quiet down, a profound peace falls over the city. The war is over. New York, battered yet unbowed, can finally sleep under the gentle light of the stars as an American city. A new nation is born, and with it a new role for New York. The long years of war are done, and now the night skies calm again over the harbor. In the stillness, only the distant lapping of the Hudson against the docks hints at the passage of time, as New York prepares to rise with the coming dawn of a new era. In the aftermath of the Revolution, New York City awakens to a fresh start. The 1780s bring an air of optimism and rebuilding. Though scarred by fires and conflict, the city's advantageous harbor and enterprising people quickly set it on a path of recovery. Soon, New York finds itself at the center of the young United States. In 1785, the Confederation Congress meets in New York, making the city the nation's seat of government. A grand federal procession in 1788 celebrates the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, with banners and the 13-gun salute echoing along Broadway. Then, on a mild spring day, April 30, 1789, New York hosts an event for the ages, George Washington's inauguration as the first President of the United States. Imagine the scene at Federal Hall on Wall Street that day. A crowd gathers in excited hush below the balcony. Washington steps out, solemn and dignified in a brown suit, and places his hand on a Bible. As he swears the oath of office, cannon fire booms in celebration, and the people erupt in cheers, filling the streets with jubilation. Church bells ring exuberantly across the city, mingling with the cheers. At night, New York is illuminated by celebratory bonfires and candlelit windows, a city proud to be the first capital of the new republic, though this honor will be short-lived. By 1790, the capital will move to Philadelphia. The 1790s see New York expanding rapidly. The population climbs past 30,000 by 1790, making it one of the nation's largest cities, and soon to be the largest. Streets are rebuilt and extended over the former ruins of war. Commerce booms once more. The port bustles with merchant ships from Europe, and now also from places like China and India, as American traders venture across the seas. On the East River, new piers and warehouses spring up in a neighborhood aptly named South Street Seaport. The salty air there is thick with the perfume of spices, tea, and coffee from distant lands. New York has truly become a gateway to the world. Wall Street, which once literally had a wall along it, now hums with economic activity. In 1792, a group of merchants and stockbrokers signed the Buttonwood Agreement, forming what will become the New York Stock Exchange. Under the buttonwood tree's shade, deals are struck and fortunes made, foreshadowing the city's future as a financial powerhouse. Walk a few blocks north, and the city's transformation is evident in other ways. The streets themselves are evolving. In 1785, Broadway is lit for the first time with oil-fueled street lamps, tiny beacons flickering through the night. By 1800, the clamor of construction is common as buildings grow taller, though just 3 to 5 stories, and new roads are cut through farms and estates. City planners, peering into the future, conceive an audacious plan, the Commissioner's Plan of 1811, which lays out a vast grid of straight streets and avenues across all of Manhattan Island. Picture surveyors hacking through brush and climbing rocky hills, planting markers that will become the intersections of 34th Street and 5th Avenue, 125th and Lexington, and so on. Though at this moment cows still graze in pastures uptown and mansions sit isolated in the woods, the blueprint for a modern metropolis is set. The idea of an orderly grid is both elegant and sobering, as it means even the island's many hills, celebrated by the Lenape, will eventually be leveled for development. Still, for now, beyond the populated tip of Manhattan stretch rural scenes, gentlemen's country estates, orchards and gardens, and the occasional tavern on old post roads. New York's growth is further turbocharged by a marvel of engineering, the Erie Canal. Completed upstate in 1825, the canal connects the Hudson River to the Great Lakes, and thereby to the endless resources of the American interior. On a sunny day in 1825, New York throws one of the grandest celebrations in its history, a wedding of the waters. A flotilla of boats travels from Buffalo down the new canal, and when the convoy reaches New York Harbor, the governor ceremoniously pours a keg of Lake Erie water into the Atlantic, symbolizing the union of the waterways. Church bells ring and cannon fire is sequentially discharged from Buffalo to New York, each relay boom marking the canal's course across the state. This canal ensures New York City will dominate trade. Grain and goods from the vast Midwest now flow into its port more easily than ever. Almost overnight, New York becomes the busiest port in America, outpacing rivals. By 1835, it surpasses Philadelphia as the nation's most populous city, a position it will never relinquish. In these early decades of the 19th century, one can feel New York's youthful energy. The city is still small in geography, largely confined to the lower half of Manhattan, but it is teeming with activity. Horse-drawn omnibuses, early buses, begin to clatter along the cobblestones, carrying passengers along Broadway. Markets are lively gathering places. The Washington market bustles with vendors selling meats and produce, while fishermen at Fulton Market display the morning's catch, striped bass, shad, oysters by the barrel. There is a sense of modernity creeping in. The wooden palisade wall is long gone, replaced by a street of banks and businesses. In 1817, the city gets its first public transit when a horse-drawn streetcar line opens. In 1818, the Black Ball Line introduces scheduled packet ships, making voyages to Europe regular like clockwork. New innovations, steam power for example, appear. In 1807, Robert Fulton's steamboat Clermont chucks up the Hudson, making river travel faster and foreshadowing a network of steam ferries and ships that will soon crisscross the harbour. The wharf's sounds change as a result. Alongside the snap of sails and cry of gulls, one now hears the churning chug-chug of steam pistons and the occasional shrill whistle. Culturally, New York is blossoming too. By the 1820s, the city is known for its vibrant newspapers and literary scene. Writers like Washington Irving walk these streets. Irving pens nostalgic stories of old Dutch New York, and the first elements of a distinct American culture emerge in the city's theaters and salons. Nightlife remains relatively tame. Taverns and coffee houses for the respectable, and perhaps a few dance halls and oyster cellars where sailors and the underclasses carouse. The city gets its first formal police force in 1845, bringing more order to the nights. Before then, a city watch did their best to keep peace, but crime and vice were common in certain quarters. Yet, even amid progress, the natural world still hugs close. The northern boundary of the settled city, around present-day Canal Street, gives way to marshes like the Lispinard Swamp and the wide expanse of the Collect Pond, a spring-fed lake that once provided fresh water. By 1800, the pond had become polluted by industry and was eventually drained, a sign of the environmental costs of growth. In its place, a new neighborhood rises, eventually known as 5 Points. But some evenings, when a fog rolls in, one might imagine the ghost of the old pond reasserting itself in the damp air. Meanwhile, on summer nights, fireflies flicker in the gardens of uptown estates, and frogs croak in distant wetlands, reminders that much of Manhattan is still wild. As the 1820s turn to 1830s, the city's skyline begins to change in a new way. Churches and early skyscrapers of their day. The graceful spire of Trinity Church, rebuilt in 1846, soars over downtown, and its bells mark the hours. Along the waterfront, new warehouses reach 5 to 6 stories, astonishing heights for the time, with pulleys to haul goods to upper floors. There is construction everywhere, heralding an era of expansion. And with expansion comes the human tide, a swelling population. By 1820, over 120,000 people call New York home. By 1840, more than 300,000. These numbers include waves of immigrants who are starting to arrive from Europe in ever greater numbers. The city hums with many languages and faces. Irish and German newcomers in particular begin to stream in, especially in the 1840s during famine and political upheaval abroad, adding to the rich tapestry of New York's streets. This is a bustling boomtown now, noisy, crowded, perhaps a bit chaotic, but full of promise. At dusk in the burgeoning city, oil lamps now line more streets, casting a warm golden glow on brick facades. Picture standing at the Battery again, circa 1825. The harbour is lively with ships' lights bobbing on the dark water, the smell of the sea mixing with the smoke of countless hearth fires. You might hear fiddle music drifting from an alehouse, or the distant horn of a steam ferry shuttling late travellers. The silhouette of the city is low and jagged, pierced by church steeples and the masts of docked ships. Stars peek out above, reflecting in the waters below. There is a calmness here at the edge of the sea, even as the city grows relentlessly behind you. The Hudson River's current sweeps past silently, as it has through every era. In that gentle flow, one can imagine the memories of Lenape fishermen, Dutch traders, British soldiers, and American merchants all drifting together. New York, only a few generations removed from its wilderness beginnings, is now firmly set on its course to become a great city. Yet greater changes, of a magnitude hard to imagine, lie on the horizon, approaching with the speed of an ocean storm. For now, though, the city rests in this moment of early triumph, the night breeze carrying both the echo of history and the whisper of the future. Through the 1830s and 1840s, the city's heartbeat quickens. Immigrants pour in, industry rises, and the grid marches uptown. Soon, the sleepy village of the past will be transformed by the thrill and tumult of the industrial age, with all its sorrows and splendors. The mid-19th century brings a surging tide of humanity to New York's shores. Down at Castle Garden, the wooden rotunda at the Battery that serves as America's first immigrant reception center, thousands of newcomers step off sailing ships each week. Imagine a crisp morning in 1847. A ship from Ireland has just arrived after a long Atlantic crossing. Weary passengers, many fleeing famine, gaze with hopeful eyes at the bustling docks of Manhattan. They feel the firm ground beneath their feet and breathe in the unfamiliar mix of odors: coal smoke from steamships, horse manure from the streets, the brine of the harbor, and the aroma of fresh bread from a vendor's cart. These new arrivals speak in lilting Gaelic. Others arriving the same day speak German, Swedish, Italian, and dozens of other tongues. The city welcomes them all, though not always kindly. The newcomers pack into overflowing tenements, transforming neighborhoods like the infamous 5 Points near today's Chinatown, which becomes a dense maze of rickety buildings and narrow alleys teeming with life. 5 Points is rough and impoverished, but also culturally vibrant. Here African Americans, Irish, and others live cheek by jowl, creating new American art forms like tap dance, born from Irish jigs and African rhythms amid the squalor. New York in the 1850s is a city of constant motion and noise. Construction is everywhere as the city expands northward along the grid laid out in 1811. Wooden shanties and old farmhouses are torn down, replaced by rows of brick row houses and tenements. The sounds of hammers and saws fill the daytime air. Dirt roads are graded and paved. The grid's relentless geometry carves its way through hills and estates. To address the growing need for clean water, as the old collect pond is long gone and wells are inadequate, a marvel of engineering, the Croton Aqueduct, is completed in 1842, bringing fresh water from upstate. The opening of the aqueduct is celebrated with a parade, and soon graceful fountains in places like Union Square spray crystal water, a luxurious sight in the city's squares. Now the sound of sprinkling water joins the urban soundscape, and residents revel in clean water flowing from new hydrants and taps, replacing the old hand-pumped wells. The streets teem with life and often chaos. Horse-drawn carts rumble by. Vendors shout their wares, fishmongers, rag collectors, organ grinders, newsboys hawk the latest papers with dramatic cries. By 1860, more than 800,000 people are crammed into Manhattan, and the city's edges are pushing upward, past 42nd Street even, into what once seemed remote. In 1857, work begins on a grand experiment, Central Park. The city leaders, foreseeing the need for green space, hire Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux to design a vast urban park, an emerald oasis in the midst of the growing metropolis. Over the next decade, workers will blast rock, cart away soil, plant trees, and sculpt lakes to create the pastoral landscape. But in these years one might see, along Upper Fifth Avenue, laborers with picks and shovels, working by the sweat of their brow to transform swamps and squatter villages into what will become the nation's first major landscaped public park. By the 1860s, the lower portions of Central Park opened to the public, and what a contrast they offered to the city's frenzy. On a spring day after its opening, one can stroll along winding paths flanked by blossoming dogwoods and forget the honking geese of the crowded streets. Children sail toy boats on the park's pond. Couples take carriage rides under shady arbors. The motive of nature re-enters the urban life through Central Park, birds singing in the heart of the city, and the scent of mown grass and pine carrying on the breeze, providing a soothing counterpoint to Manhattan's din. Yet, even as the city builds this peaceful haven, the nation hurtles towards conflict. In 1861, the Civil War erupts. New York, with its deep economic ties to the South, many merchants have profited from cotton and trade, is not uniformly abolitionist. Still, when Fort Sumter falls, many New Yorkers rally to the Union cause. Broadway sees patriotic parades and the departure of volunteer regiments to the front. Factories in the city churn out uniforms, weapons, and supplies for the army. The war effort brings both unity and strain. In July 1863, anger boils over, upset by the new Union draft law, which conscripts men to war but allows the rich to buy their way out. Mobs, largely of Irish working-class men, erupt in the draft riots. For 4 days, chaos rules parts of Manhattan. Rioters target government buildings, wealthy homes, and horrifically, black residents whom some blame for the war. Fires rage, and the thunder of rioting crowds and militia gunfire replaces the usual city soundscape. It's one of the bloodiest urban disturbances in American history. Eventually, Union troops rushed up from Gettysburg, and local forces quell the violence. After the riots, a somber quiet returns. The city is shaken. Many black families move away to Brooklyn for safety. This dark episode leaves scars, but New York endures. The Civil War ends in 1865, and with it slavery is abolished nationwide, a moral victory that the city will come to appreciate in time. In the post-war period, New York surges into what Mark Twain dubbed the Gilded Age, an era of dizzying wealth for some and grinding poverty for others. The city's economy explodes with industry and immigration. By the 1870s and 1880s, steamships have replaced sail for transatlantic travel, and at the southern tip of Manhattan, the brand new Brooklyn Bridge rises across the East River, an engineering marvel of steel cables and Gothic stone towers. Picture the bridge's construction in the 1870s. High above the river, workers called sandhogs toil in dangerous caissons beneath the water, and ironworkers inch along narrow catwalks strung between the bridge's soaring towers. At night, the unfinished structure is marked by lantern lights hanging like stars over the dark river. When the Brooklyn Bridge finally opens in 1883, New Yorkers celebrate with fireworks that light up the sky, and a procession of people and horses cross this stunning span that binds two cities together, Manhattan and Brooklyn. The bridge's elegant silhouette against the sky becomes a new motif, progress and unity in physical form. This era sees skyscrapers begin to punctuate the skyline. The very first steel frame buildings start to climb in the 1880s and 90s. The city's church steeples are soon rivaled by commercial palaces like the World Building and the Singer Building downtown. These early skyscrapers, maybe 10 to 20 stories tall, are dubbed cloud scrapers by awed observers. Looking up at them from the busy streets below, one might feel a sense of both wonder and trepidation. Could structures so tall really stand? Stand they do, and more are coming, reaching ever higher. By 1900, the Flatiron Building at 23rd Street, a slender triangular tower, captures attention with its bold shape, and as the wind gusts around its corners, pedestrians laugh and chase flying hats. The skyline is in flux, a jagged contest of spires reaching toward the heavens. Down at the harbour, in 1886, a new colossus arrives that will become an enduring symbol of the city. On an October day, hundreds of boats crowd the bay, and throngs of people line the Battery and waterfront rooftops, straining for a view. Across the waves comes the Statue of Liberty, a gift from France, her copper visage serene, torch aloft. As she is dedicated, a mighty cheer rises and ships blare their horns in salute. Lady Liberty stands on Bedloe's Island, now Liberty Island, and at night her torch glows over the harbour, a welcoming beacon for ships coming from the dark Atlantic. Almost immediately, she becomes a motive of hope for immigrants. In the 1890s, as Ellis Island Immigration Station opens just to the north, millions of newcomers pass by Liberty, enlightening the world. For them, the sight of her shining torch through the mist is unforgettable. Weary and anxious after long voyages, they take it as a sign that they have arrived in a land of freedom and opportunity. One can imagine in 1892 a young girl from Italy standing on a ship's deck at dawn, clutching her mother's hand, eyes wide as the statue's colossal form emerges out of the morning haze. Perhaps a tear glints as they realize they made it. The city's immigrants enter as a maelstrom of activity. Manhattan, now more than ever, is the city that never sleeps. The phrase actually comes a bit later, but already the spirit is present. By 1898, a monumental change in governance takes place. New York City consolidates. The separate city of Brooklyn, along with the mostly rural areas of Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx, are merged with Manhattan into a single metropolis of 5 boroughs. Overnight, the population doubles to over 3 million, making New York one of the world's greatest cities in scale. This greater New York spans from the farms of eastern Queens to the woodlands of Staten Island to the tenements of the Lower East Side, a vast urban tapestry stitched together by politics and progress. The consolidation is celebrated with fireworks and fanfare on New Year's Day 1898. Skeptics worry the city may be too large to govern, but visionaries see a unified future. During these Gilded Age decades, wealth and innovation transform Manhattan, especially downtown and the new Midtown area. Fabulous mansions line Fifth Avenue, home to titans of industry, the Vanderbilts, Astors, and others, who throw opulent balls in glittering gaslit halls. One could stroll along Millionaire's Row on a winter's eve and see these palaces ablaze with light, hear music wafting from ballroom windows as New York's high society dances in marble-clad rooms. Meanwhile, not far away, the tenements of the Lower East Side heave with poverty and overcrowding, multi-story buildings cut up into tiny flats where families of 10 cram into 2 rooms, garment workers sew piecework by candlelight, and boarders sleep in shifts. The contrast is stark. In the notorious Five Points and Bowery districts, one finds street urchins, pickpockets, and destitute new immigrants struggling to survive. Yet even there, communities form and support each other in adversity. The smell of fresh bread from a Jewish bakery or the sound of a German beer hall song might bring some cheer amid hardship. Reformers like Jacob Riis shine a light, literally, with early flash photography on these conditions in the 1890s, prompting nascent movements for housing reform. In the broader city, infrastructure races to keep up with growth. New elevated railways, the L trains, are built in the 1870s, clattering above major avenues on iron viaducts and carrying commuters far uptown in minutes. Their rattle and clang becomes a signature sound above 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 9th Avenues. Down below, horse-drawn streetcars still jostle for space with wagons and carriages. Street lights have evolved from oil to gas, and by the 1880s, electric arc lamps begin to light some areas with a bluish-white glow, making nightlife safer and more enticing. One can walk along Broadway at Union Square in 1895 and see both gas lamps and newer electric lamps illuminating the facades of grand department stores like Arnold Constable and Siegel Cooper, where by-day throngs shop in what some call palaces of consumption. Cultural life is flourishing. The Metropolitan Museum of Art opens in a Central Park building in 1872. The New York Public Library is founded in this period. Its magnificent main building will open in 1911. Concert halls and theaters thrive. By 1883, the Metropolitan Opera House stands on 39th Street, its chandelier illuminating the gowns and tuxedos of operagoers who arrive by carriage. The sounds of this era span class and culture. The laughter of vaudeville audiences at Tony Pastor's Theatre, the clink of champagne glasses at Delmonico's restaurant, where the rich dine on oysters and terrapin, the clamour of pushcart markets under the shadow of the Williamsburg Bridge, where recent immigrants haggle. There's the whistle of factory steam in new industries, the clang of the blacksmith in his farrier shop, the call of newsboys, extra, extra, heralding everything from presidential elections to the latest scandal. In 1895, one could hear the excited cheers of spectators at the first organized baseball games at the Polo Grounds, or catch an early motion picture flickering in a Nickelodeon by 1900. As the century closes, New York stands transformed. No longer a colonial seaport, it is a throbbing, modernizing metropolis, second in the world only to London in size. It has been a century of astonishing growth, from a town of 30,000 to a city of over 3 million. The skyline at night now twinkles with thousands of gaslights and a few electric bulbs. A traveller returning after decades away would scarcely recognize the place. But some constants remain. The Hudson River still sweeps by reliably, though now dotted with the lights of ferries and steamships. The night breeze still carries a hint of the sea, even if mingled with the coal smoke of industry. Central Park, completed in the 1870s, now offers all New Yorkers, rich or poor, a place of respite. On a summer evening in 1899, you might see families strolling under the elms, listening to a band concert at the Bethesda Terrace, the children chasing fireflies just as Lenape children once did in these forests of old. Time and change have accelerated, but in these shared quiet spaces, the soul of the city persists. As 1900 approaches, one might stand at the Brooklyn Bridge's midpoint on a calm night, feeling the gentle vibration of the roadway as a horse-drawn trolley rumbles by, and gaze out. To the south, Lady Liberty's torch gleams steadily. Below, the East River reflects the moonlight and the glow of the city's lamps in shimmering ribbons. The sounds of the city float up, a distant foghorn at the harbor's mouth, the clatter of a carriage, maybe the faint strains of a phonograph playing a ragtime tune at a waterfront saloon. New York is entering the 20th century with confidence, perched on the cusp of even greater achievements. The pulse of modern life is quickening, but for this moment, in the tranquil night, the great city takes a quiet breath, a brief pause before the roar of the next era. With a new century dawning, New York will soon soar to new heights. Steel and electricity, jazz and ambition will define its coming years. The city's story continues, as restless and alive as the Hudson's current, carrying us now into the 20th century. The 20th century opens with New York City firmly asserting itself as the world's premier metropolis in the making. By 1900, the 5 boroughs are unified, and the city's population exceeds 3.4 million souls. Manhattan Island, once an expanse of hills and woods, is now almost entirely a grid of streets bustling with activity from the Battery to Harlem. The new century brings inventions and bold endeavors that promise to change everyday life. One of the first great achievements is the opening of the New York City subway. In 1904, after years of digging and disruption, the first underground line opens. On opening day, curious New Yorkers descend staircases into the ground to board wooden subway cars with rattan seats, each car lit by palely incandescent bulbs. With a lurch, the train speeds off, and the crowd is amazed, whisked from City Hall to Grand Central in a matter of minutes, far faster than any horse carriage. The deep rumble of the subway soon becomes part of the city's soundscape, a steady thunder beneath the pavement. Above ground, steam still rises from manhole covers, a sign of the electrical and steam systems crisscrossing below. But now a new phenomenon appears on the skyline. Skyscrapers multiplying at an unprecedented rate. From 1900 to 1910, a race for the tallest building ensues. The graceful Singer Building rises to 612 feet by 1908. The Metropolitan Life Tower, modeled after Street Mark's Campanile in Venice, reaches even higher, its clock faces glowing over Madison Square. These tall buildings cast long afternoon shadows and redefine the city's profile. A visitor arriving by ship finds their breath taken away. The once low city now greets them with a forest of steel. Mark Twain quips that the city's architecture is an assemblage of spears piercing the sky. At night, many of these towers are outlined in electric light, an innovation of the era, so the skyline sparkles like a fairyland, a preview of the famous City of Lights persona to come. Meanwhile, Times Square is born. In 1904, the New York Times moves to a new tower on 42nd Street, and the intersection of Broadway and 7th Avenue is renamed in its honor. Almost immediately, Times Square becomes a hub of activity and neon advertising signs. By 1910, this Great White Way is ablaze with some of the city's first large electric billboards, bathing theatergoers in a brilliant glow of moving lights and signage. The noise here is relentless, streetcars clanging, automobiles, a new sight, honking their brass horns, and crowds chattering as they head to one of the dozens of new theaters or vaudeville shows in the vicinity. The city's expansion is not just upward but outward. The consolidation has opened vast tracts for development. The Bronx sees rapid growth, with new apartment buildings lining the Grand Concourse by the 1910s. In Queens and Brooklyn, formerly rural areas sprout street grids and housing for working families. The sounds of construction are everywhere, from the blast of dynamite carving subway tunnels under the East River to the hum of electric streetcars, now connecting borough neighborhoods. In 1903, the Williamsburg Bridge opens, followed by the Manhattan Bridge in 1909, further knitting together Manhattan and Brooklyn with spans of steel. Each new bridge is celebrated with processions and fireworks, the city throwing itself a party of connectivity and growth. This era also marks New York's rise as a center of finance and industry. In 1907, despite a financial panic that rattles the nation, J.P. Morgan and other financiers gather in downtown banks by gaslight to stabilize the economy, a prelude to the creation of the Federal Reserve. By day, Wall Street is a canyon of imposing stone buildings where stock tickers chatter out streams of numbers and messenger boys sprint between brokerage houses. The New York Stock Exchange building, opened in 1903 with its marble facade and lofty trading floor, is a temple of capitalism, its steps crowded with traders in straw boater hats sharing the latest tips. A low roar of voices can be heard from the street when the exchange is in session, like the roar of the sea rising and falling with the fortunes of markets. New York's harbor, too, is at peak intensity. The immigrant wave that began in the mid-1800s crests in the first years of the 20th century. At Ellis Island, day after day, thousands of newcomers are processed. By 1907, over 1 million in 1 year alone. The island's Great Hall echoes with every language of Europe as families clutch their papers and bundles, hoping for entry. Many will settle in New York, making their homes in the teeming ethnic enclaves. Italians on Mulberry Street and in East Harlem, Eastern European Jews on the Lower East Side, Chinese in a growing Chinatown, Irish in Hell's Kitchen and the South Bronx, Germans in Yorkville, and so on. Each enclave adds its flavors and sounds. The clip-clop of a horse-drawn cart selling gelato in Little Italy's summer, the scent of garlic and tomato wafting through windows, the counter's song calling the faithful to prayer in a crowded synagogue off Hester Street, the clattering mahjong tiles and Cantonese chatter in a Mott Street tea house, the lively polkas and beer hall songs drifting from Yorkville's taverns. The city is a mosaic of villages, each vibrant with its own culture, yet all knitted together by the identity of being New Yorkers. There are hardships, to be sure. Tenements are still overcrowded and conditions harsh. In 1906, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, though about Chicago, spurs food safety reforms that affect New York's meatpacking and markets. In 1911, the tragic Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in Greenwich Village kills over 100 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, and shocks the city's conscience. This horrific fire, which occurred in a loft building near Washington Square, sees trapped workers leaping from windows, a devastating sight against the spring sky, and catalyzes improvements in fire safety and labor laws. Out of sorrow grows reform, stronger unions, safety regulations, and a new resolve to make the city safer for the humble workers who keep its wheels turning. New York also asserts itself as a world capital during this era. In 1909, the city throws a grand Hudson-Fulton celebration, marking the 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson's voyage and the centennial of Fulton's steamboat. For 2 weeks, spectacular events unfold. A great naval parade of warships from around the world up the Hudson, flotilla of replica historic boats, fireworks every night, and the illumination of city landmarks with new electric lights. Spectators line the shores in the hundreds of thousands, and the city basks in pride and wonder. It feels as if New York is saluting both its past and its technological future in one grand gesture. As the 1910s progress, World War I looms. Before the US enters the war, New York's economy booms, supplying the Allies. The waterfront is busy around the clock. The sounds of loading and unloading, winches whirring, crates thudding onto docks, mix with the steam whistles of departing ships. In April 1917, when America joins the war, patriotic fervor sweeps the city. Recruiting stations in Times Square see eager young men line out to enlist. Troop trains roll out of Penn Station, carrying soldiers off to training, bands playing them off with martial tunes. The city organizes war bond rallies. Even the children contribute pennies to buy an ambulance for the troops. On certain nights, coastal blackout drills take place, lights dimmed to guard against potential enemy ships or zeppelins, though the threat is remote. Still, Broadway's neon is muted occasionally, giving Times Square an unaccustomed darkness, broken only by the glow of the moon and a few headlights of early automobiles. It's an eerie, almost peaceful sight, the city that loves light holding its breath under the stars. When the war ends in November 1918, New York erupts in celebration. Spontaneous parades jam the streets. In lower Manhattan, a storm of ticker tape from the stock machines is flung from office windows, creating the first of what will become the city's famous ticker tape parades. The paper flutters down like confetti snow on the jubilant crowds along Broadway, which will later be nicknamed the Canyon of Heroes for these moments. People sing "Over There" and the Star-Spangled Banner, embracing strangers in the street. At night, the city is ablaze again. Headlights, marquees, streetlights, no longer wary of attack. The war's end also coincides with a pandemic, the influenza outbreak of 1918. But in the initial burst of joy, people focus on the triumph. New York has sent its sons overseas and welcomed them home as victors. A new sense of American leadership in the world pervades the air, and New York stands at the forefront, prosperous, confident, and ready to stride into the roaring decade that will follow. One can imagine walking through Central Park in the fall of 1918 just after the armistice. The oak leaves are golden underfoot. A few soldiers in uniform stroll hand in hand with sweethearts along the mall beneath the arching elms. A gentle wind ripples the surface of the conservatory water pond, where a toy sailboat painted with Allied flags glides in the breeze. The city beyond the trees hums with hope factories, switching from munitions back to consumer goods, theaters readying new shows, jazz beginning to play in uptown clubs. Night falls early. As you exit the park, the city's lights sparkle to life. Maybe you hear the distant syncopated notes of a new music called jazz, carried from a Harlem speakeasy or a Greenwich Village cafe, heralding the cultural blossoming on the horizon. The Great War is over. The jazz age is about to begin. And New York City, ever resilient, stands poised between hardship and hope, eager to dance forward. The 1920s arrive on a gust of jazz and progress. The city's skyline will climb ever higher, its culture flower in new directions. Through prosperity and looming hardship, New York's indomitable spirit continues, buoyed by the river of time, flowing onward like the eternal Hudson toward the sea. The 1920s in New York City burst forth in a dazzling roar of energy, creativity, and excess, a true jazz age that swings the city into a modern era. As the nation prospers after World War I, New York becomes the very emblem of the decade's exuberance. Skyscrapers race each other upward. In Manhattan's skyline, music and laughter spill out of night spots until the early hours, and an air of confident modernity pervades daily life. the city seems to sparkle, literally and figuratively. Broadway, now fully electrified, is a canyon of neon and incandescent light, earning its nickname the Great White Way. At Times Square each night, giant illuminated advertisements flicker and animate. An enormous whiskey bottle pours glowing liquor. A cigarette billboard puffs rings of smoke. The effect is mesmerizing. New Yorkers tilt their heads up like curious tourists, marveling at the spectacle above. In these lights, one can read the city's mood: optimistic, bold, unrestrained. This decade is a time of prohibition, 1919 to 1933 nationally. The sale of alcohol is illegal, yet New York famously thumbs its nose at the ban. The result is the rise of the speakeasy, secret bars where one can sip gin or champagne behind shuttered windows and locked doors. On a given night in the mid-1920s, hundreds of speakeasies hum across Manhattan, from elegant hideaways in Midtown where socialites and movie stars mingle, to smoky cellar jazz clubs in Harlem where the music is hot and the drinks even hotter. You might imagine descending a narrow staircase behind an unmarked door, hearing a password, and entering a room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smooth sound of a jazz quartet. The jazz music is the heartbeat of the city now, rhythmic, innovative, at times wild. In Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance is in full bloom, a cultural and artistic explosion led by black artists, writers and musicians. On Lenox Avenue, clubs like the Cotton Club and Small's Paradise draw both black and white patrons, though often segregated in practice, to hear legends such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Bessie Smith IV. The sultry notes of a saxophone, the steady thump of a bass, and the snappy syncopation of piano keys spill into the night streets of Harlem, where literary lights like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston pen poetry and stories that will resonate for generations. Harlem's night is alive with creativity, art, music, and intellectual ferment, truly a renaissance of African-American culture that influences the entire nation. In this northern Manhattan neighborhood, rent parties, informal gatherings to help pay the rent, become common, where neighbors dance in crowded apartments to the rollicking tunes of a stride pianist. The sense of home-cooked soul food mix with cigarette smoke and perfume, and the floor literally shakes with the stomp of joyous feet. Downtown, the 1920s are equally heady. Flappers, young women with bobbed hair and short dresses, dance the Charleston in packed dance halls. They symbolize a new freedom, defying conventions with each kick of their heels. Men don sharp suits and fedora hats. The more daring drive shiny new automobiles through the city's streets, though traffic jams are becoming an issue as cars proliferate. The sound of a Model T's horn, an ogre, and the growl of its engine join the traditional clip-clop of horse-drawn wagons still delivering milk or ice in some neighborhoods. It's an era straddling old and new. While elevated trains still rattle overhead, below ground the subway system expands and carries millions of riders a day. Coney Island in Brooklyn, with its gaudy amusement parks, draws crowds to its beaches and rides. Squeals of delight ring out from the Cyclone roller coaster, opened 1927, and the Wonder Wheel. New York is enthralled by the notion of leisure and fun as never before. Skyscraper construction reaches a climax as titans of industry vie for the glory of the world's tallest building. In 1929, construction begins on the Chrysler Building, and its spire, a gleaming Art Deco crown of steel arches, is secretly assembled and then hoisted into place in 1930, making it, for a brief moment, the tallest in the world. Shortly after, in 1931, The Empire State Building is completed, piercing the clouds at 1,250 feet. The Empire State's construction is itself legendary. Thousands of workers labored at breakneck speed, completing it in just over a year. In the early morning or late at night, you could stand near 5th Avenue and 34th Street and hear the clang of rivets and see the sparks of hot metal even after sundown, as crews worked around the clock illuminated by floodlights. When the building opens, its beacon blinks triumphantly atop, the new king of the skyline. At night, New Yorkers gaze up at its mast glowing red or white as airplanes, another new phenomenon, occasionally circle to show off this beacon of modernity. The skyline at night in the late 1920s is a jaw-dropping vista. Art Deco skyscrapers like the Chrysler Empire State and dozens of others, aglow with uplighting and crowned by neon or floodlit spires, mirrored by the Hudson and East Rivers. People take to rooftops or to the new observation decks just to take in the panorama. The city is also the financial capital of the world in this era. Wall Street booms through most of the 1920s, fueling the prosperity. It seems everyone, from cab drivers to socialites, is speculating in the stock market. But under the upbeat jazz and the hum of wealth, there are signs of strain. Tenements are still full, farmers upstate and elsewhere struggle, and wealth inequality is extreme. These cracks become a chasm with the crash of 1929. In late October of that year, the stock market plummets. The news spreads like wildfire. Frantic scenes outside the stock exchange, with brokers despairing. As 1930 dawns, the Great Depression sets in. The jazz and champagne continue for a time in denial, but gradually the tone of the city changes. By 1930 to 31, bread lines appear on streets as unemployment soars. The roaring 20s come to an abrupt, sobering end. But let us linger a bit more in the mid-20s at the height of the roar. Picture an evening in 1925, often cited as the peak of New York's ascendancy. Indeed, by 1925 New York is the largest city on earth, having surpassed London in population. The city celebrates itself with boundless optimism. On a summer night that year, you might attend a rooftop party atop a new skyscraper like the Ritz Tower. The air is warm, the city lights sparkle below, and a jazz band plays under the stars. The view is staggering. To the south, the clusters of skyscrapers downtown. To the north, more towers rising in Midtown. To the west, the Hudson reflecting the moonlight, and beyond, the twinkling lights of New Jersey. The Hudson River, constant and calm, flows as it always has, but now its banks are lined with piers bearing ships from every corner of the globe. Truly a world city. There's a sense that New York is the center of everything. Finance, entertainment. The new motion picture industry thrives in New York until it gradually migrates to Hollywood art. Galleries in Midtown show the latest modern art. And literature, with the Algonquin Round Table wits trading barbs at their famed daily luncheons. Radio is a new marvel. Families gather around glowing sets to listen to music and news, including broadcasts from news stations in New York like WEAF. The voice of the city extends far beyond its physical borders, now via radio waves, a foreshadow of the global influence it will wield. Yet, as the decade wanes, subtle changes herald the end of this party. By 1928, some speakeasies have an undertone of desperation. Not everyone is sharing in prosperity. But on the surface, New York remains as dynamic as ever. The motifs of the era, jazz, lights, skyscrapers, motion, remain vivid. The Central Park you wander into on an early 1920s morning remains a peaceful refuge, however. Joggers, well, men in white exercising suits, run along its paths. Artists paint scenes by the lake. The park's trees, now mature, swish in the breeze. You may even see remnants of the old, a horse-drawn carriage still offering romantic rides, passing by a shiny new Packard automobile on the park drive. A sense of balance between old-world charm and new-world progress is felt in these juxtaposed sites. Late one summer night in the 1920s, as you leave a Harlem jazz club, you might hear the quiet clip-clop of a horse making its way down a side street, the cart driver singing a blues tune softly to himself. The city that never sleeps still has quiet pockets where an almost rural peace can be felt. A cat slinking along a fence, a lone street lamp casting a circle of light on an otherwise empty street, the sound of your own footsteps echoing as you walk. The motif of distant footsteps in the still of the night reminds you that for all its noise and brightness, New York still offers solitude to those who seek it. As 1929 turns to 1930, we leave the roaring 20s with a final image. New Year's Eve 1929 in Times Square. Despite stock market worries, a massive crowd gathers as always. The Times Square Ball, a billowing sphere of lights, descends at midnight, and the crowd roars in the new decade with cheers, kisses, and confetti swirling like snow. In that moment of revelry, nobody knows the hardships the 1930s will bring. For now, hope prevails, and the city's spirit of celebration is undimmed. The old year dies in a blaze of neon and song, and the new year is born amid the cacophony of horns and shouts. New York stands, as ever, at the center of the world's imagination, glittering, confident, alive. But as the champagne glasses empty and dawn of the 1930s arrives, the music slows. The exuberant dance gives way to a more somber tune. The Great Depression casts its shadow, and New York will face one of its greatest trials. Yet even in the darkest times, the city's heart keeps beating, steady as the Hudson's eternal tide. The early 1930s cast a pall of economic hardship over New York City, as they did over the entire nation. The Great Depression hits this metropolis with full force after the stock market crash. Almost overnight, fortunes vanish and jobs disappear. The gleaming towers of Wall Street are now home to quiet offices where typewriters fall silent and ticker tapes cease their cheerful chatter. Banks struggle or fail. The once frenetic trading floor of the stock exchange is subdued. Across the city, one can see tangible signs of distress. Soup kitchens operated by charities ladle out meals to lines of hungry men and women, their faces lean and eyes downcast. In Central Park, the great lawn, not yet the lush field we know today, becomes the site of a makeshift Hooverville, a shanty town of tar paper shacks and scavenged wood, where the homeless camp in the heart of Manhattan. At dusk, small fires dot the camp as people cook whatever meager food they have, the smoke mingling with the early evening mist. The once roaring city seems to be holding its breath. Yet even in these dark times, New York's spirit of resilience quietly endures. The city's leadership and its people refuse to let it crumble. Projects are undertaken to put people back to work and to inspire hope. In 1931, as if thumbing its nose at the Depression, the Empire State Building opens. This colossus, completed ahead of schedule, stands largely empty of tenants at first, dubbed the Empty State Building by wags, but it instantly becomes a symbol of aspiration. Many New Yorkers for a nickel take the elevator to the observatory, if only to feel lifted above their troubles for a moment and to gaze out at the city they love. On a clear day up there, the view stretches for 80 miles, and one can see the patchwork of boroughs and the ribbon of the Hudson leading out to sea, a reminder of broader horizons and possibilities. Elsewhere, the city invests in infrastructure, partly thanks to government programs. The Triborough Bridge project gets underway, linking Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx with a massive span. In 1932, the city's pride swells as New York hosts the Summer Olympics. Well, sort of. Los Angeles is the official host that year, but New York holds its own games of the Depression in a way, staging athletic events and public morale boosters. The iconic Rockefeller Center development breaks ground in the early 30s, providing jobs to thousands. For a time, the steel frame of Rockefeller Center's RCA building rises above Midtown like a giant skeleton. Famous photographs show construction workers perched on beams high in the sky, eating lunch with their legs dangling over the city far below. Eventually, Rockefeller Center opens in 1933 to 1940 in phases, bringing new life to Midtown with its shops, theaters, like Radio City Music Hall, which opened in 1932 and offered dazzling stage shows for an escape, and public art. During winter, the sunken plaza becomes an ice skating rink, and the laughter of skaters twirling under the Christmas tree lights warms the cold air, a new tradition that will carry on for decades. In Harlem, the Renaissance quiets as economic hardship hits the community hard, yet the creativity doesn't vanish. Jazz and blues clubs continue, though many artists face lean times. The Apollo Theatre, which opened in 1934, offers affordable entertainment and launches new talents with its amateur nights. Even in hardship, music finds a way. The strains of Duke Ellington's orchestra, now often heard on the radio from his nationwide broadcasts at the Cotton Club, bring the sounds of Harlem into living rooms across America, subtly knitting the country with cultural threads even as economic threads fray. On the Lower East Side, many immigrant families struggle, but communities band together through mutual aid societies and neighborhood networks. One can witness small kindnesses, a bakery giving day-old bread to those who can't pay, neighbors sharing a pot of stew, children patching each other's worn shoes with bits of leather. The motive of continuity is evident in daily rituals. Church bells still ring on Sunday. Vendors still cry out on Orchard Street, peddling second-hand goods, and the East River tides still pull flotsam back and forth past the docks. Life goes on, even if more frugally. New York's cultural scene adapts to the times. The Broadway theaters face a downturn, but out of necessity comes creativity. The Federal Theater Project, a New Deal program, in the mid-1930s funds plays and performances, bringing affordable or free theatre to the public. Orson Welles and others get their start here, staging innovative productions. The movies, now firmly established with sound, offer escape. The grand movie palaces of Times Square and elsewhere, the Paramount, the Roxy, are filled with New Yorkers watching Hollywood films, a brief respite from reality for 25 cents. Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, shown in 1931, brings both laughter and tears to audiences who deeply relate to its themes of hardship and hope. Despite the Depression, some of the world's tallest buildings continue to rise. In 1930, the Chrysler Building had briefly held the crown. By 1931, the Empire State took it. And downtown in 1930, the Bank of Manhattan Trust Building, 40 Wall Street, and the City Services, City Service, building at 70 Pine both soar above the older skyline, as if the momentum of the 1920s carried a bit into the 30s. These Art Deco towers, with their sleek setbacks and spires, now stand as monuments to a better yesterday and beacons for a brighter tomorrow. At night, though some offices are dark, their top floors are still often lit, illuminating the gloom with architectural beauty. A profound event lifts spirits in 1932. Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt, a native New Yorker, is elected president, promising a New Deal for America. Many New Yorkers feel a kinship and hope with FDR at the helm. Under his administration, projects that benefit the city accelerate. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, hires artists to paint murals, such as those in Harlem Hospital and other public buildings, and laborers to improve parks and roads. LaGuardia Airport construction begins in the late 30s, heralding the importance of air travel. And in 1939, New York proudly hosts the World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, Queens. This is a truly remarkable moment. As the world teeters towards another war, unbeknownst to most fairgoers, the fair's theme, Building the World of Tomorrow, offers an optimistic vision. The fairgrounds feature fantastical pavilions and the iconic Trilon and Perisphere structures, modernist symbols of the future. Crowds from all over gather to marvel at new technologies like television and futuristic cars, and to be inspired that better times are ahead. The Trilon, a tall triangular spire, and the Perisphere, a huge globe that houses a diorama called Democracy, glow ethereally at night, reflected in pool waters, capturing the imagination of millions. The fair provides employment and a morale boost. Even the very landscape is symbolic. The site was once a dumping ground, infamously called the Valley of Ashes in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, now transformed into a gleaming expo, a testament to renewal. Throughout the Depression, Central Park remains what it was intended to be, a democratic refuge. One might find an out-of-work businessman feeding pigeons next to a recent immigrant mother watching her children play. In the park, social barriers soften. The seasons still paint the park with beauty. Cherry blossoms in spring, lush green lawns in summer, where people lie to forget their worries for a while, vibrant leaves in autumn, and snow that covers the city's grime in winter, muffling the world in a peaceful white. On winter evenings, the lake freezes and local boys scrape out improvised ice rinks to skate, their laughter echoing among bare oaks. If you close your eyes, perhaps you can imagine it's a winter in the 1700s or 1800s, so timeless the scene feels. Despite economic woes, New Yorkers find joy in small things. In summer, they escape the heat by sleeping on fire escapes or flocking to Coney Island's beaches. The subway fare is only a nickel, and the ocean's breeze is free. The sound of children splashing in the Atlantic surf, the calls of vendors selling clams or hot dogs on the boardwalk, and the distant carnival music from the Cyclone roller coaster all create a reassuring normalcy. At Coney Island in 1933, the site of the new Wonder Wheel Ferris wheel turning slowly against the sky, with couples and families sharing bird's-eye views of the shore, brings smiles. By the latter half of the 1930s, under Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, elected 1933, a fiery reformer who read comics on the radio to kids during a newspaper strike and championed the common people, the city starts to climb out of despair. LaGuardia, with federal support, cleans up corruption, Tammany Hall's long reign ends, and pushes for civic improvements. The new mayor's voice, high-pitched, passionate, becomes familiar on radio addresses. His belief in the city is infectious. He opens the new LaGuardia Airport, named ironically after himself in 1939 while still in office, as people already credit him for the project, bringing New York further into the age of aviation. As the decade closes, the Depression's grip is loosening, though the threat of war overseas grows. In 1939, with the outbreak of World War II in Europe, New Yorkers listened to newsreels in movie theaters and radio bulletins with concern. But there is a sense that the city, having survived the worst economic calamity, can weather anything. One can imagine a night in 1938, standing at the edge of the Hudson in Battery Park. You see ocean liners like the Queen Mary or the Normandy docked. These huge, graceful ships are symbols of global connection, and also of how travel has become accessible. The Normandy, with her Art Deco splendor, is lit up in port and is a jewel against the dark water. The Statue of Liberty stands nearby, the torch extinguished due to an earlier explosion in 1916 and not yet relit. It wouldn't be fully relit until after World War II, but she remains a dark silhouette of promise. The air has a chill, and a distant foghorn from a tugboat on the river sounds its lonely note. The skyline is less lit than in the 20s. To conserve money, some skyscrapers dimmed decorative lighting during the Depression, but still many windows glow. The Empire State Building often shines a beacon from its mast, and that night perhaps it's lit in a soft white, cutting through a low-hanging cloud. The city that had danced through the 20s and nearly stumbled in the 30s is standing tall again as it enters the 1940s. New York has learned patience, compassion, and ingenuity in adversity. Block by block, life carries on. In a small diner in the Village, a few late-night patrons sip nickel coffees and chat with the owner about baseball. The Yankees have been a bright spot, winning multiple championships in the 30s with stars like DiMaggio. A radio plays softly in the background, maybe an orchestra broadcast from the Hotel Pennsylvania's Café Rouge. The melody of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a new song from 1939, drifting in the quiet. There is sorrow behind and uncertainty ahead, but also a persistent hope. As the 1930s close, New York has proven its resilience. The stage is set for another transformation. War is on the horizon, and with it will come challenges and then unparalleled prosperity. The city's backdrop, its bridges, parks, skyscrapers, are ready like a great stage awaiting the next act. And through it all, the Hudson River flows on, as it has from the beginning, a silent witness to New York's trials and triumphs. Now, the eve of World War II approaches. The city's lights will be ordered dimmed for defense, and her sons will march off to distant battlefields. But New York will once again serve as a crucible of resolve and renewal, emerging from the war years into a golden age that will transform it yet again. In the early 1940s, the storm clouds of World War II envelop the globe, and New York becomes a crucial home front and staging area for the United States. December 7, 1941 arrives. The radio crackles with news of Pearl Harbor. By the next day, America is at war. Almost immediately, New York shifts to war footing. The city that had just begun to flourish again now channels its energy into the war effort. Factories in the boroughs convert to producing military supplies. Brooklyn's Navy Yard bustles 24/7, building and repairing ships. Women nicknamed Rosie the Riveters weld and rivet hulls and decks with determination. The harbour, always the city's lifeline, is now filled with grey troop transports and supply convoys. The majestic ocean liners, like the Queen Mary, are repainted battleship grey and used to ferry soldiers to Europe, sometimes carrying tens of thousands at a time. Standing at a high point like the Empire State Observation Deck in 1944, one might see a convoy of ships dotting the harbour, accompanied by tugboats busy churning, and perhaps catch the low rumble of a warship's horn as it departs. New Yorkers endure some precautions. At night, blackout drills are conducted. Although the enemy never bombards New York, the city practices as if it might. Wardens ensure that lights are turned off or windows covered with blackout curtains so that the skyline goes dark, making it harder for hypothetical enemy planes to navigate. This lends the city an unearthly beauty, the heavens above more visible than they've been in decades, with stars shining brightly over a dimmed Manhattan. People walk carefully through shadowed streets or use special dim flashlights, and they speak in hushed tones as if not to break the spell. The Hudson River under starlight reflects only the faint glimmer of the moon and a few navigation lights. All else is black. It's ironic that in a city famed for lights, darkness became a form of protection, but there's also a quiet comfort in it, a nightly moment of peace amid war anxieties. By day, the city is anything but dark. It's vibrant with purpose. Propaganda posters are everywhere. Buy war bonds signs hang in subway stations, and indeed New Yorkers pour savings into bonds to support the troops. Children collect scrap metal and rubber for recycling into wall material. They haul pots and old tires to collection points, proud to contribute. Rationing affects daily life. Families use ration books to buy sugar, meat, and gasoline. Many New Yorkers plant victory gardens in vacant lots or on rooftops. Even a sunny windowsill might host a box growing tomatoes or herbs as part of the collective effort. The smell of victory gardens, tomato plants, basil, soil becomes a new, if subtle, part of the summer city smellscape, mixing with the usual odors of hot pavement and subway grates. Every week, more young men leave for service. Pennsylvania Station and Grand Central Terminal witness tearful farewells as troops board trains bound for training camps. The sound of departing train whistles now carries extra poignancy. And later, when the telegraph messenger is seen heading towards an apartment building, hearts skip a beat, fearing the worst news from the front. The war touches every block. Casualty lists published in the papers include familiar surnames from the neighborhood. Amid hardship, the city stays lively in spirit. Swing music becomes the soundtrack of the home front. The big bands of Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Glenn Miller play in hotels and on the radio, giving people reason to dance. Places like the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem are packed, as integrated crowds dance the Lindy Hop to lift their morale, the floor literally bouncing with their exuberance. On Saturday nights, USO clubs around the city host dances for servicemen. Young soldiers and sailors on leave dance with local girls in church basements or ballrooms decorated patriotically. The sound of laughter and jazz echoes even as the war rages abroad. Throughout the war, New York serves as a port of embarkation and later debarkation. Come 1945, as the war nears its end, the city is swept up in two massive celebrations. First in May 1945, VE Day. Victory in Europe sees rejoicing crowds. Then on August 14, 1945, news of Japan's surrender VJ Day triggers perhaps the largest spontaneous outpouring of joy in the city's history. In Times Square, confetti and ticker tape rain down like a blizzard. Strangers kiss and dance. famously captured in the iconic photograph of a sailor kissing a nurse amid the throng. The cheers are deafening. Church bells ring wildly, cars honk in celebration without pause. People hug police officers, climb lampposts, weep openly with relief and happiness. The war is over. That night, New York is brilliantly lit from end to end. No more blackouts. The skyline blows triumphantly. Fireworks explode over the East River. From the Statue of Liberty's crown, which had been closed during the war, an observer might see the city twinkling as if every window were a candle of hope. As the troops come home, New York is ready to boom. The late 1940s bring an economic expansion. Factories retool for consumer goods, new cars fill the streets, and eventually create new traffic woes. A housing shortage spurs construction. Modern apartment complexes rise, including massive city-backed projects like Stuyvesant Town for returning veterans and young families, which opened in 1947. A city within a city of red brick buildings, green lawns and playgrounds, signaling a new approach to urban living. The GI Bill allows many veterans to attend college or buy homes. Neighborhoods in Queens, like fresh suburb-like developments in Fresh Meadows or Bayside, and in Eastern Bronx see an influx of young families. The city's skyline also gains some new crowns. The United Nations chooses New York as its permanent home, and in 1949-50, the sleek modern United Nations headquarters rises along the East River. This glass and marble complex is a striking departure from Art Deco, an international style of architecture symbolizing hope for world peace. Delegates from all nations now walk the streets of Turtle Bay and Midtown, adding an international flair to the city post-war. At the dedication, flags of many countries flutter in the East River breeze, a colorful motif of unity. In the 1950s, other cities might envy New York's status, capital of finance, arts, and now international diplomacy. The 1950s in New York are often seen as a golden age of sorts. The economy is strong and cultural life is rich. Broadway enters a golden era of musical theater. Rodgers and Hammerstein's shows like South Pacific and The King and I grace stages with their very music born from war and global awareness. And West Side Story, 1957, retells Romeo and Juliet on the city's streets with a modern social message. In Midtown, jazz gives way somewhat to new genres. By late 40s and 50s, bebop jazz thrives in clubs on 52nd Street and Greenwich Village with legends like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, their frenetic tunes heard in intimate bars, thick with cigarette smoke. The visual arts flourish in these years too. Abstract expressionist painters like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning create masterpieces in downtown lofts, while the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum draw record crowds to exhibitions. The Met's imposing columned facade welcoming the growing middle class, who now have leisure for museum going on weekends. Meanwhile, everyday life achieves new comforts. Air conditioning starts to become more common, though not yet ubiquitous, making summers a bit more bearable indoors. The subway system, though aging, still costs only a few cents and is the lifeblood of commuting. One might notice in the 1950s, during rush hour, a more diverse workforce. Women who had entered the workforce during the war continue to take jobs as secretaries, teachers, and increasingly other professions. In the boroughs, a car-based lifestyle slowly emerges. Highways spearheaded by master planner Robert Moses snake through and around the city. The Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, the Cross-Bronx Expressway, lasting controversially through working-class neighborhoods. the Long Island Expressway, all begun or built in the 1950s. These roads make it easier to travel, but also herald the rise of the automobile and the flight to suburbs. Many city dwellers, especially from middle-class backgrounds, begin moving to suburbs in Long Island or New Jersey, thanks to new bridges, like the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, opened 1964, a bit later, and parkways. But the city's population overall still grows, enriched by new waves of immigration post-1945. Puerto Ricans arrive in great numbers. The Great Migration from Puerto Rico, making Spanish Harlem thrive. Refugees from war-torn Europe settle, displaced persons from Eastern Europe, Holocaust survivors building new lives in NYC's boroughs, and by late 50s and 60s, immigrants from the Caribbean and East Asia come as immigration laws loosen. Each group adds threads to New York's tapestry. For instance, by the 1950s, you can find authentic Puerto Rican mofongo being cooked in East Harlem, new Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and expanding Chinatown now, including more Chinese fleeing upheaval in Hong Kong and mainland China. Central Park in the 1950s remains an urban oasis. Families picnic on weekends, and children ride the carousel, restored after wartime neglect. The park's zoo, though very old-fashioned by today's standards, is a popular attraction. Kids press against the iron bars to glimpse elephants and lions, and toss peanuts to the monkeys. In winter, the park's Woolman Rink, opened 1949, attracts skaters of all ages who glide under the open sky to piped-in music. A young couple might skate hand in hand on an early evening as snow lightly falls, then warm up with hot cocoa sold by a vendor at the rink's edge. The gentle sound of skate blades on ice and distant laughter provides a soothing city lullaby. At the Battery, the city's most ancient park, one can now board a ferry to a new national monument. In 1957, the Statue of Liberty's torch is relit. It had been off due to structural issues and the war, and reopened to the public, symbolizing Liberty's return in full glow. Tourists and locals alike line up to climb her crown once more, peering out at the harbor she has guarded since 1886. A particularly poetic sight in those years. In 1956, the liner SS Andrea Doria tragically sinks off Nantucket, and survivors are brought to New York on other ships. Lady Liberty is their first welcome, and the city embraces them, showing the enduring role of New York as a haven. In the financial district, a building boom also quietly begins in the late 50s. Modernist glass towers like the Seagram Building, 1958, on Park Avenue introduce sleek corporate modernity. The old skyline of spires is gradually giving way to a plateau of boxes. But not to worry, the iconic silhouettes still dominate for now. Stand on the Queen's waterfront in 1955 at twilight. The Empire State Building still unquestionably lord of the skyline, with the Chrysler Building's illuminated crown a gem to the south. The new UN building stands out by the river with lights in many windows where diplomats work late. The sky might be streaked with the contrails of jet airplanes. As the jet age begins, Boeing 707s start flying from Isleworld Airport, later JFK. In 1958, New York's sky sees more planes, a sign of the shrinking globe. With prosperity, car culture also brings challenges. The streets are crowded with tail-finned Chevrolets and Buicks, and parking becomes a nightmare in some areas. Many old brownstones are converted to boarding houses or offices to accommodate growth, and there's talk of tearing down older, obsolete neighborhoods to build new. In 1955, The once grand Penn Station's demolition is a few years away, 1963. But already some think old infrastructure must bow to new, though in Penn Station's case, the loss will spur a landmark preservation movement. But that's in the 60s. One cannot leave the 1950s without mentioning baseball, the sport that so often provided the city solace and pride. The New York Yankees dominated the decade, winning multiple World Series with stars like Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra. On warm summer afternoons, the roar from Yankee Stadium in the Bronx drifts across the Harlem River. In Brooklyn, the beloved Dodgers finally clinch their first championship in 1955, bringing ecstatic joy to Brooklynites who had endured years of wait till next year. The triumph and subsequent heartbreak when the Dodgers and Giants leave for the West Coast in 1957 marks the end of an era, a piece of innocence lost. But for those years, the cry of the vendor, peanuts, popcorn, get here hot dogs, and the crack of the bat at Ebbets Field were as much the sound of New York as taxi horns or subway clatter. As the 1950s roll into the 1960s, New York stands at a peak, the world's largest city at around 8 million people, a beacon of freedom and culture in the Cold War world, economically strong, and about to undergo social and physical changes that will test its resilience anew. The nights remain magical. One could drive to the new Tappan Zee Bridge up the Hudson and look back at Manhattan's glittering necklace of lights, or perhaps go to the newly opened 1955 observation deck of the RCA building at Rockefeller Center, top of the rock, and gaze at the star-like city below, the cars tiny, the people tinier, all part of this immense living organism. The Hudson River, lined now with post-war developments and highways, still flows calm and reflective, connecting past to future. In these post-war nights, a gentle peace can be felt. Perhaps you're walking through a quiet East Village street on a spring night, and you catch the far-off melody of a doo-wop group singing under a street lamp. 4 voices harmonizing nostalgically their song, in the still of the night perhaps, echoing against brick facades. In that moment, time stands still. The eras merge. The harmony could as easily be from the 1890s barbershop or a church choir. New York's soul, through wars and depressions and booms, remains the amalgam of millions of personal moments like this. The city, ever changing, ever the same, gently ushers you onward to its next chapter. Ahead lie the tumultuous 1960s and 1970s, years of social revolution, economic challenges, and urban transformation. The city's skyline will climb high yet with new icons, even as some neighborhoods struggle. Through it all, the sounds of footsteps, whether marching in protest or strolling in solidarity, will continue to mark New York's journey through time. As the 1960s dawn, New York City finds itself at the epicenter of sweeping social change. The swinging 60s bring vibrant cultural revolutions and, by the end of the decade, serious economic and social challenges. The contrasts of this era are stark. Glittering achievement and gritty reality walk hand in hand on the city's streets. In 1960, the skyline gains a new marvel. The stainless steel-topped Chrysler Building and Empire State now have a competitor as the tallest. The Pan Am Building, now MetLife Building, towers above Grand Central, a massive modern slab that some criticize for blocking the vista down Park Avenue. It symbolizes corporate power and the jet age. Pan Am, the airline, places a huge logo atop it. Meanwhile, down at the tip of Manhattan, excavation begins for what will become the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers, envisioned to revitalize downtown, will rise throughout the late 60s, with hundreds of workers climbing into the sky on steel beams. For now, though, Lower Manhattan is a noisy construction site, pile drivers thudding into bedrock like a giant heartbeat, and cranes swinging materials about. The Hudson River is partially landfilled to create the World Trade Center site, literally extending Manhattan's shore, a testament to human reshaping of the land. By 1970, Tower 1 of the World Trade Center will top out, and in 1973 both monolithic towers open, briefly the tallest buildings on Earth, their broad flat tops often passing through clouds. The Twin Towers' emergence marks the start of a new era and symbol, one that will last a short 3 decades. But architecture is only one facet. The 1960s in New York pulse with social activism. Civil rights movements find strong voices here. In 1964, following racial unrest and a tragic incident in Harlem, thousands marched to protest racial injustice. You can hear their chants of "We shall overcome" echoing along 125th Street, fists raised, diverse faces united for equality. The NAACP and other groups rally in front of City Hall demanding fair housing and employment. Meanwhile, in 1969 in Greenwich Village, the gay community reaches a turning point with the Stonewall uprising. On a hot June night, a routine police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar, triggers spontaneous resistance. Patrons and allies fight back, throwing coins, then bricks, forcing police to retreat. For several nights, Christopher Street is alive with both anger and a newfound pride. The birth of the gay rights movement takes place with the chorus of protest, the flashing lights of police cruisers, the forming of a community that refuses to be pushed into the shadows any longer, the distant sound of sirens and shouted slogans around Sheridan Square mark an epochal change in social consciousness. Across the city, counterculture flourishes. The East Village becomes a hub for hippies, artists, and anti-war activists. In Tompkins Square Park, you might find a Be-In, a gathering of youth with guitars, strumming folk songs, the sweet smell of incense and other substances in the air, colorful psychedelic clothing creating a human tapestry on the grass. Beat poets like Allen Ginsberg chant verses at cafes. Andy Warhol and his factory churn out avant-garde art and films, birthing pop art. The motifs of Campbell's soup cans and Marilyn Monroe prints become icons. In music, while Broadway still presents polished musicals, the streets give rise to new sounds. The girl groups of the early 60s, the folk revival. Bob Dylan arrives in Greenwich Village in 1961, strumming at Café Wa. Then rock. In 1964, the Beatles land at JFK, the airport renamed from Idlewild in 1963 after the assassinated President Kennedy, and cause a sensation at the new Shea Stadium in Queens, with a concert heard through screams and fainting fans. That moment, 55,000 teenagers crying and cheering in a baseball stadium, is a new motif of global pop culture converging on New York. Later the decade, music festivals like the Harlem Cultural Festival of 1969, sometimes called Black Woodstock, fill Mount Morris Park with the soulful voices of Nina Simone, Stevie Wonder, and others, as a proud celebration of black culture and resilience amidst turmoil. While culture thrives, the city's infrastructure and finances begin to strain. White flight to suburbs accelerates in the 60s. Many middle-class families move out, in part spurred by integration and the allure of suburban living, facilitated by those new highways and the GI Bill mortgages. This, along with industrial decline, erodes the tax base. By the late 60s, New York faces budget shortfalls and an aging transit system. The subway, while still the lifeblood, becomes graffiti-covered and less reliable. Yet, ironically, the visual of colourful graffiti on subway cars becomes another cultural motif of the 70s. The city's struggles literally expressed as art on its rolling stock. In 1965, a significant event, a massive blackout plunges the entire Northeast, including New York City, into darkness. On a cool November evening, the lights flicker and go out. The city that never sleeps pauses in stunned silence, then adapts. Thousands are trapped in elevators and subway cars, but New Yorkers exhibit their trademark grit and camaraderie. Subway riders cooperate to climb out and walk along tracks to safety. Neighbors direct traffic at intersections with flashlights. The sky over Manhattan that night is said to have revealed the Milky Way to many residents for the first time, as all electric blows ceased. People recount helping strangers, sharing candles, listening to transistor radios in the dark for news. Unlike a later blackout in 1977, the 1965 outage is mostly peaceful. When power returns after about 12 hours, it's almost disappointing to some who savoured the unexpected quiet and brightness of the stars. By the 1970s, however, the city is in deep fiscal and social trouble. Crime rates climb sharply. 1970s, New York is often remembered for its grittiness. Times Square, once a family-friendly district, becomes infamous for peep shows, grindhouse cinemas, and illicit activity. A garish theatre of neon signs advertising adult entertainment. Many buildings are in disrepair due to landlord neglect or arson, especially in poorer areas like the South Bronx, parts of Brooklyn and Harlem. Indeed, the South Bronx becomes a national symbol of urban decay. By mid-70s, abandoned, burnt-out buildings line many blocks. One might stand on a South Bronx street in 1975 and see open lots where tenements stood, windows of remaining buildings gaping like empty eyes, the smell of smoke and rubble lingering, and a quiet that's eerie for the city, broken only by distant car alarms or the boom of a firefighter's axe tearing into another smouldering structure. It's in this crucible of poverty and neglect that a cultural phoenix rises, the birth of hip-hop. In 1973, DJ Kool Herc, a Jamaican-American teenager in the Bronx, pioneers the breakbeat at a block party on Sedgwick Avenue. Kids who can't afford instruments turn turntables into instruments, spinning records to isolate percussive breaks, and MCs, rappers, hike the crowd with spoken rhymes. Soon breakdancers are spinning on cardboard mats on street corners, and aerosol artists are tagging subway cars with bold murals. By 1977, the city's youth have given the world a whole new genre of music and art. The pulse of hip-hop, heavy bass from boomboxes, the chick of a scratching record, and the rhythmic poetry of rap becomes the heartbeat of battered neighborhoods, the creative response to hardship. Then comes the 1975 fiscal crisis. New York City, on the brink of bankruptcy, pleads for federal help. The famous, though slightly misquoted, Daily News headline, "FORD to City," drop dead captures the feeling of abandonment when President Ford initially refuses aid. To close budget gaps, the city lays off thousands of police, firefighters, and teachers. Services suffer. At one point in 1976, every firehouse in the South Bronx was closed due to budget cuts, even as fires raged. It is a low point. But through creative financing, the Municipal Assistance Corporation, big MAC, is formed, and federal loans, the city averts outright bankruptcy. Still, austerity is felt everywhere. During this time, everyday New Yorkers adapt. Families share resources, community groups take on roles the city can't fill, such as neighborhood watch patrols or community gardens in vacant lots. The Green Guerrillas movement starts in the mid-70s, turning rubble-strewn lots into vegetable gardens and flower patches, adding unexpected green tranquility amid decay. Another dark event strikes in July 1977, another citywide blackout. This time, unlike 1965, the heat is sweltering, the economic frustration palpable, and within hours of the lights going out, widespread looting and arson erupts in some neighborhoods. The sky glows ominously from multiple fires in places like Bushwick, Brooklyn, and the South Bronx. The sound of shattering glass and distant sirens fills the night. However, in other parts of the city, the blackout again brings out the best. Communities band together to protect local stores or help direct traffic. Still, the 77 blackout reinforces the sense of a city in crisis. Yet, even in 1977's darkness, there are literal bright spots. In some neighborhoods, particularly in Manhattan, people hold spontaneous block parties to cheer themselves up. In one notable image, residents of one block strain up a few battery-powered or generator-run lights and have a street dance, a defiant celebration of community. And not long after, that same summer, the Yankees win the World Series, giving the city a morale boost, the first championship since 1962, heralding the Bronx is burning era paradoxically culminating in baseball glory. During the 70s, other movements simmer. The women's liberation movement has a strong presence in New York. Protests and marches for equality egg the women's strike for equality in 1970 down Fifth Avenue, bring tens of thousands of women calling for equal rights, their footsteps assertive, carrying signs, babies in strollers, chanting for empowerment. The environmental movement also touches the city. Earth Day is inaugurated in 1970 with events in NYC. By the late 70s, the city begins to clean up its act. For instance, dumping in the rivers is curtailed and awareness of air pollution grows. One can notice the skies gradually getting a bit clearer, though smog still sometimes browns the horizon. The late 1970s see seeds of renewal being planted. Ed Koch becomes mayor in 1978, bringing a bit of optimism and trademark brash cheer. How am I doing? He'd ask random New Yorkers. The city slowly recovers financially. New developments like the rejuvenation of South Street Seaport and plans for Battery Park City, built on earth excavated for the World Trade Center, signal that the city is not giving up. The arts remain a beacon. Broadway rebounds with hits like A Chorus Line, which opened 1975 and ran for 15 years, and the blossoming disco scene at clubs like Studio 54, where celebrities and ordinary folks dance under a neon moon, escaping the city's troubles in music and glamour. Walking through Central Park in the 1970s, one would find it rough around the edges, graffiti on the bridges, some lawns dusty, but still beloved. People continue to jog. The jogging craze took off in the 70s, and the New York City Marathon started in 1970 with a few laps around the park. By 1976 expands to a 5-borough race, showing the world that every part of NYC can be united in this joyous test of endurance. On Marathon Sunday, the sound of cowbells and cheering echoes down Fifth Avenue as runners of all backgrounds stream by. many draped in flags of dozens of nations, a living tapestry of the city's diversity and determination. By the end of the 70s, New York has been through near collapse that finds itself inching toward revival. The motifs of this era, graffiti, fiscal ledgers, protest signs, disco lights, blackout stars, and burning buildings, are intense and sometimes tragic. But underlying them is the thread of resilience. The city's lifeblood, its people, adapt and push forward. The late-night conversations on stoops, the block associations forming to take back their streets, the artists turning blight into canvases, all of these sow the seeds for the remarkable rebirth that will come in the following decades. As the sun sets on the 1970s, imagine sitting at the newly refurbished Battery Park at the very tip of Manhattan. The twin towers of the World Trade Center loom to your left, stately and impassive, their windows glowing with office lights as some people work late. To your right across the Hudson, the lights of New Jersey's Gold Coast begin to twinkle. Development is even reaching those shores. Directly ahead, Lady Liberty stands, and beyond her the Verrazano Bridge's lights form a necklace across the Narrows. It's quieter here than the bustling Midtown. The water gently sloshes against the seawall. You might hear a distant tugboat horn. A few fishermen cast lines into the river. The air smells faintly briny with a hint of fuel from the nearby ferry terminal. In this relative calm, you reflect on New York's journey. The city has been tested, scared, yet its essence remains, creative, irrepressible, and alive. Tomorrow brings the 1980s, and with them, a resurgence that once again will transform the city. But for now, in the velvety night, the enduring Hudson River flows on, carrying away the troubles of yesterday and bringing, on its next tide, hopes for a better tomorrow. Out of the economic shadows, New York will roar back in the 1980s and 1990s, shedding much of its grit and gaining new polish. In the following decades, the city reclaims its stature as a capital of finance and culture, even as it faces new trials and triumphs, from devastating tragedy to dazzling rebirth as a safer, revitalized metropolis. The journey continues under the watch of the same eternal moon and the ceaseless currents of time. The 1980s arrive with New York City at a turning point. After the tumult of the 70s, the city stands battered but unbowed, ready to reinvent itself. What follows is a dramatic revival, though not without its complexities. The motif of rebirth defines these decades, the city shedding old skins and emerging renewed. In the 1980s, under Mayors Ed Koch and then David Dinkins. In 1990, Dinkins becomes NYC's first black mayor. New York focuses on rebuilding and safety. The economy gets a boost from a Wall Street boom. The financial industry, aided by deregulation and the rise of new technologies, thrives spectacularly. The stock market becomes a symbol of the era's excess and wealth. Yuppies, young urban professionals, fill Manhattan offices, clad in power suits with suspenders, making deals by day and frequenting glitzy clubs or high-end restaurants by night. The movie Wall Street, 1987, immortalizes the mantra greed is good, and indeed a city budget benefits from rising tax revenues. New skyscrapers sprout in Midtown in the late 80s, sleek, mirrored glass towers like 550 Madison, originally at &T Building, with its Chippendale top, or Worldwide Plaza on 8th Avenue. The skyline twinkles more profusely as older buildings, like the Empire State, adopt new floodlighting. In 1976, they began changing its lights for holidays, egg red/green for Christmas, adding festive nighttime color above. At street level, changes gradually appear. By the late 80s, graffiti that once covered subway cars is largely gone, a result of aggressive MTA cleaning campaigns. As a train snakes above on the elevated tracks in Queens, one sees now clean silver exteriors rather than multicolored tags. The subways, though still hot and crowded, become safer and more reliable as the decade goes on, thanks to investment in maintenance and a growing police presence. It's in these years that the strategy of broken windows policing, addressing small crimes to prevent big ones, takes root, though its full effects are debated and will be most felt in the 90s. Times Square undergoes a phoenix-like transformation. In 1984, the city clears the way for redevelopment. Slowly, the adult theaters and grindhouses are shuttered, though not without protest from those who see it as sanitizing culture. By the late 80s and early 90s, new businesses and the Disneyfication of Times Square are in motion. One can still find some seediness if looking for it, but now the glow of massive neon signs advertises more mainstream fare, and new skyscrapers like One Times Square, with its famous New Zipper and New Year's Eve ball, are effaced and improved. Standing in Times Square in, say, 1995 is very different from 1985. The air feels more tourist-friendly. The sidewalks are packed with families and out-of-towners, and an NYPD substation with a bright neon sign assures visitors of safety. Cartoonish costumed characters, like knockoff Disney figures, begin to appear, presaging the full-blown characters of the 2000s. It's as if the crossroads of the world got a thorough scrubbing, for better or worse. One emblematic event of the city's resurgence is the 1986 Statue of Liberty Centennial. After years of fundraising and renovation, with help from millions of Americans, Lady Liberty is magnificently restored. On July 4, 1986, New York hosts a grand birthday party. Tall ships from around the globe parade in the harbor, a stunning parade of ships reminiscent of 1976 bicentennial, and at night possibly the largest fireworks display the city had ever seen explodes over Liberty Island. The sky lights up in cascades of red, white, and blue sparkles reflected in the Hudson and East Rivers, while the statue, newly gilded torch ablaze, stands proudly. Crowds line the shores and rooftops, the collective oohs and ahs at each burst echo between skyscrapers. It's a moment of civic pride, a symbol that New York and America have overcome the dark times and are celebrating freedom and renewal. Meanwhile, in the boroughs, communities continue to thrive and change. The immigration wave that started in the 60s and 70s accelerates post-1965, when U.S. immigration laws were liberalized. By the 80s and 90s, Queens is deemed the most ethnically diverse urban area in the world. You can ride the 7 train through Queens and hear a babel of languages at each stop. Spanish in Jackson Heights, Chinese and Korean in Flushing, which becomes a new bustling Chinatown by the 90s. Hindi and Urdu in Richmond Hill, Tagalog in Woodside, Greek in Astoria, though less so as the decades progress and Astoria diversifies further. Little India appears in Jackson Heights, complete with celery shops and curry restaurants exuding mouth-watering aromas of cumin and coriander onto the street. In Brooklyn, Brighton Beach transforms into Little Odessa as Soviet Jews immigrate in the 80s and create a Russian enclave with Cyrillic signage on grocery stores selling black bread and caviar. The rich mosaic of cultures ensures that New York's energy remains globally inflected. You can traverse continents by moving through neighborhoods. The late 80s also see the beginning of the drug epidemic and an associated crime wave which hits poor communities especially hard. Though overall crime peaks around 1990 and then starts a remarkable decline, the late 80s and very early 90s are still tense in some areas. The nightly news reports drive-by shootings or turf wars, and sirens often wail through the night in affected neighborhoods. The city responds by expanding the police force under Mayor Dinkins, hiring thousands more officers via the Safe Streets, Safe City program, which sets the stage for the policing successes of the mid-90s. People begin noticing improvements. By the mid-1990s, you might see children playing on stoops again in areas where fear previously kept them inside. Culturally, the 1990s bring another flowering. Broadway hits like The Phantom of the Opera, 1988, and The Lion King, 1997, draw millions, revitalizing Times Square. The arts scene burgeons in different ways. The alternative music scene in the East Village and Lower East Side spawns clubs like CBGB that foster punk in the late 70s and alternative rock by the 90s. Hip-hop, born in the Bronx, becomes mainstream, and by the 90s, superstars like Notorious Big and Wu-Tang Clan from Staten Island bring New York rap to global ears. Their music videos often feature New York's landscape, from project courtyards to the Manhattan skyline, spreading the imagery of the city worldwide. The cityscape in the 90s further transforms. In 1992, the new Times Square Ball is made of waterfalled crystal, symbolizing the square's polished new image. The real estate boom leads to glassy new residential towers in once neglected areas like Lower Manhattan's Battery Park City, built on landfill by the World Trade Center, now a thriving neighborhood with parks and a yacht harbor. The skyline gets redefined as older tall buildings are joined by new ones. It's not just Manhattan. In Queens, the hulking City Court building, now One Court Square, goes up in 1990 in Long Island City, a rare skyscraper outside Manhattan, signaling the city's eventual expansion of business districts to the outer boroughs, a significant historical marker. In 1993, the World Trade Center is attacked. A truck bomb explodes in the underground garage, killing 6 and injuring many. It shakes Lower Manhattan and is a prelude of worse to come, though at the time it is a shocking but contained event. I recall the evacuation. Thousands of workers streaming down smoky stairwells in darkness, guided by emergency lights, emerging onto the plaza dazed and dusty but alive. The towers stand firm through that blast, and after repairs reoccupy. Still, the 1993 bombing is a sign that New York, even in renewal, faces new kinds of threats in a changing world. Another calamity turned triumph. In 1993, the Long Island Railroad shooter tragically shakes the suburbs, but out of it, New Yorker Carolyn McCarthy becomes a gun control advocate and later congresswoman, showing how tragedy fuels activism. By the mid-90s, under Mayor Rudy Giuliani, elected 1993, the crime rate plummets dramatically. Tourists return in droves. New York feels safer than it has since maybe the 1950s. Central Park, which was feared by some in the 70s and 80s at night, becomes a safe haven again. Thanks to efforts of the Central Park Conservancy, lawns are green and tended, graffiti is removed, benches are painted. On a summer day in 1995, you can sit by Bethesda Fountain and watch rollerbladers glide by to upbeat music, and kids sailing toy boats on the conservatory water with hardly a worry. The city's collective shoulders seem to have relaxed a bit. The late 90s also bring tech and media booms. Silicon Alley, centered in Flatiron and Soho, grows the city's tech sector. Dot-com startups occupy lofts, and young tech workers join the urban mix. The buzz of creativity shifts, partly from traditional finance to new media. The sound of dial-up modems, that scratchy electronic ding-ding, and early cell phones ringing becomes more common in offices. Throughout these decades, certain recurring motifs tie eras together. The Hudson River remains a constant backdrop. In the 1980s, the city began revitalizing the waterfront. By the late 90s, stretches of the Hudson River Greenway open, allowing people to bike and stroll along the once industrial shoreline. The smell of salt and river mud at low tide, and the sight of sailboats at sunset, remains timeless. The river sees new uses too. The Circle Line and Spirit of New York cruise boats ply tourists around Manhattan. Kayakers venture out from new piers, and every now and then visiting tall ships dock. Their masts a reminder of centuries past. Footsteps, those simple sounds, remain omnipresent. The hurried click of heels on Wall Street in the 80s, the lighter, leisure pace of sneakers through Greenwich Village street fairs in the 90s. The city's soundtrack changes in genre, but not in basic composition. Human voices, so many languages now. Traffic hum, occasional construction clangs, always building something. And nature's whispers in the parks if you listen. By 1999, New York stands transformed from 1979. It's cleaner, yes. The air is statistically less polluted due to cleaner fuel and less industry. The water in the Hudson and East River even has fish returning. You might see an adventurous soul actually fishing off a Manhattan pier and catching a striped bass. It's safer, crime down more than half. It's more expensive. Gentrification is in full swing. Artists who colonized Soho and East Village are getting priced out to Williamsburg in Brooklyn or elsewhere. It's also more connected to the world than ever, via globalization and technology. The Millennium ends with another grand celebration in Times Square on New Year's Eve 1999. This time not just a ball drop, but a sense of passing into a new era. Two immense conical searchlights are lit at the WTC, the Torch of Liberty event, shining straight up like twin beacons into the sky to welcome the year 2000. The city's iconic skyline, with the Twin Towers, Empire State, and Chrysler all illuminated, is broadcast globally as a symbol of urban achievement at the end of the 20th century. On the eve of the year 2000, if you stand on the Brooklyn Heights promenade, you witness an almost poetic scene. Across the East River, Manhattan is ablaze with light and energy. Fireworks from the Statue of Liberty are visible to the south. The Twin Towers have a flickering glow from the searchlights beneath them. The Empire State displays 2000 in gigantic lit numerals on its mast. The Brooklyn Bridge, itself an eternal motif since the 1880s, stands gracefully connecting the boroughs, adorned with light and carrying thousands of celebrants by foot and car into the city for the festivities. Behind you, brownstones of Brooklyn are quiet, perhaps families having small gatherings with sparklers on brownstone stoops. Ahead, a cacophony of joy. The river's reflection doubles the spectacle. In that moment, you feel history and future meet, all the eras of New York. Lenape to Dutch to British to Revolution, wave after wave of people, leading up to this grand city, shining at the turn of the millennium, resilient and hopeful. As New York enters the 21st century, it will face one of its darkest days, a day of unimaginable loss. But in the wake of tragedy, the city's unity and resolve will shine brighter than ever. The story continues into modern times, where New York rises again from ashes, renewing itself and standing as a testament to human resilience on the shores of its eternal river. The 21st century for New York City begins with optimism and progress. The economy is strong, the skyline iconic, and the city stands as a global capital of finance, media, and culture. But early in this new millennium, New York faces one of the gravest trials in its history, an event that will forever mark its soul. What follows is a story of tragedy, resilience, and rebirth in the modern era. In the crisp late summer morning of September 11, 2001, under a crystal blue sky, New Yorkers go about their routines. Commuters stream into offices, children settle into school, vendors set up carts of bagels and coffee. The twin towers of the World Trade Center soar above Lower Manhattan, glinting in the morning sun. At 8:46 a.m., everything changes. A hijacked commercial airplane crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, exploding into a fireball. An unimaginable scene unfolds. Smoke and flames pour from the skyscraper, and within minutes, a second plane strikes the South Tower at 9:03 a.m., confirming the worst. This is an attack, not an accident. The sounds of that morning sear into memory. The roar of jet engines, the thundering explosions, the collective gasps and screams of onlookers on the streets below, and the urgent wail of sirens as hundreds of fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles race toward Lower Manhattan. The sky, moments ago brilliantly clear, fills with black smoke billowing from the tower's gaping wounds. Papers and debris flutter against the blue backdrop like confetti from hell. The city stands in shock and horror. As the world watches on live television, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapses, plummeting in a massive cloud of dust and debris. The ground rumbles as if a giant heart has broken. People miles away feel the tremor. A gasp of disbelief sweeps those watching. One of the mighty twin towers is gone. 29 minutes later, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapses as well, leaving an eerie void in the skyline. A dense cloud of pulverized concrete and ash roils through the canyons of Lower Manhattan, turning day into night for blocks. Those fleeing on foot ahead of the dust cloud describe an otherworldly darkness, choking grit in the air, a deafening silence when the avalanche of debris finally settles. In that silence, only alarms beeping from firefighters' equipment signaling no movement, and the cries of the injured are heard. The Hudson River, moments before sparkling, now carries a layer of ash on its surface. Boats of all kinds, ferries, tugboats, private craft, converge in a spontaneous sea lift, rescuing thousands from the stricken Battery Park seawall. The human cost is devastating. Nearly 3,000 souls lost. Office workers, firefighters, police, airplane passengers, bystanders. Every New Yorker is touched. Almost everyone knows someone who perished or someone who lost a loved one. The city that once felt invincible is deeply wounded. Yet, in the midst of this darkest day, acts of heroism and solidarity shine. First responders ran up those towers to save others, many losing their lives in the effort. Ordinary citizens guided strangers to safety through smoke-obscured streets. Hospitals overflowed with volunteers lining up to donate blood. The very next day, New Yorkers lined West Street, holding signs to thank the rescuers heading to Ground Zero, even as fires still burned in the debris pile. The recurring motif of footsteps now takes the form of weary firefighters and rescuers working round the clock, their boots stirring the ash, the that blankets the ground like surreal snow. On fences and walls around the city, homemade missing person posters appear, thousands of them, each with a face and a name, a poignant gallery of hope and grief. In the weeks and months after 9/11 events, something profound happens. New York, often stereotyped as tough and unfriendly, becomes a family. Candlelight vigils fill parks. Impromptu memorials of flowers, flags, and teddy bears arise at firehouses that lost men. The smell of smoke lingers downtown for months, a constant reminder of loss, but so too does the sight of American flags, draped on buildings, hanging from apartment windows, on taxi antennas. The city's diverse communities unite in defiance of terror. At Union Square, a spontaneous memorial and gathering place, messages of peace and unity are scrawled on the pavement in chalk. Strangers comfort each other, sharing tears and stories, embracing without hesitation. The eerie quiet of the skies, all air traffic was halted for days, is gradually broken by the roar of fighter jets patrolling above, a new sound that brings both reassurance and unease. By the end of 2001, the cleanup at Ground Zero is well underway. The pile, once 8 stories high, is reduced and cleared by spring 2002. Out of the twisted steel and dust emerge symbols of hope. A particular fire truck pulled from the rubble, a crushed but intact red fire helmet, a tattered American flag that had hung at the site. Most poignantly, a single pear tree that stood in the WTC plaza is found, charred and broken, but alive. It's nursed back to health and later replanted as the survivor tree, a living testament to resilience. New York's rebirth from 9/11 events is slow but resolute. In 2002, on the first anniversary, 2 great beams of light, the tribute in light, shine out from Ground Zero, reaching into the heavens, standing in for the lost towers. These twin columns of light can be seen for miles, touching all who see them. People gather on rooftops and along waterfronts in silence, some weeping, some just gazing upward, remembering. It becomes an annual memorial each September, the silent beams now part of the city's vocabulary of remembrance. Meanwhile, life must go on. By 2003, the city's economy, which reeled from both the attacks and a recession, starts to recover. In fact, a massive building boom takes off in the mid-2000s. Cranes dot the skyline in areas like Williamsburg, Long Island City, and downtown Brooklyn, building new condos as the city's population continues to grow. It surpasses 8 million by 2000 and keeps climbing. Neighborhoods that were once industrial or neglected are transformed. The High Line, an old elevated rail on Manhattan's west side, is converted into a wildly successful linear park by 2009, with wildflowers and art above the bustle of streets, showcasing the city's knack for reinvention. If you walk the High Line at dusk, you'll smell booming grasses and hear the distant traffic below, while around you the once gritty meatpacking district pulses with chic boutiques and galleries. Lower Manhattan, scarred by 9/11 events, emerges anew. By 2006, construction of a new tower, the Freedom Tower, later officially named One World Trade Center, begins at Ground Zero. The design evolves, but its aspiration is clear: to fill the void in the skyline and stand as a statement of resilience. Around it, a memorial takes shape, 2 huge reflecting pools set in the footprints of the original towers, with cascades of water, the largest man-made waterfalls in North America, endlessly flowing down the sides. When the National September 11 Memorial opens on the 10th anniversary in 2011, It becomes a place of pilgrimage and contemplation. The sound of the waterfalls is powerful yet soothing, masking the city noise and allowing space for reflection. Engraved around the pools are the names of all who perished on 9/11 and in the 1993 bombing. People run their fingers over the bronze-etched names. Some tuck flowers into the letters. On anniversaries, twin beams of light rise again, and the city pauses to read the names, remember and heal. The One World Trade Center Tower, with its shimmering faceted glass, steadily climbs and is completed in 2014, reaching a symbolic 1,776 feet tall, including its spire. It becomes the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. On a clear day, its spire is visible from all 5 boroughs, even from New Jersey and Long Island. A new exclamation point on the skyline. Climbing its observation deck in 2015, you feel a heart-stirring view. New York sprawled below, vibrant and whole. The Statue of Liberty far in the harbor still holding her torch high. The Empire State Building uptown still elegant. Bridges like lace spanning blue water, and at your feet, the memorial pools glinting in the sun, always remembering. It's a view of both loss and triumph. New York in the 2010s flourishes. The city hosts millions of tourists a year, over 60 million by the late 2010s, an all-time high. Times Square becomes a pedestrian plaza, throbbing with giant LED billboards and visitors snapping selfies with costumed characters. Brooklyn becomes globally synonymous with cool. Areas like DUMBO and Bushwick thrive with art galleries, tech startups, and cozy cafes. The arts remain as dynamic as ever. New musicals. Hamilton in 2015 revolutionizes Broadway with its hip-hop take on history. Art installations pop up in parks, and the Tribeca Film Festival, founded in 2002 to revitalize downtown post-9/11, grows into a respected institution. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the city also tackles challenges: widening inequality, shiny new skyscrapers for billionaires rise, like the slender 432 Park Avenue. Yet across the river in parts of the Bronx people struggle with poverty, and events like Hurricane Sandy in 2012, which floods parts of the city, plunging much of Manhattan into darkness for days. After Sandy's waters recede, one sees a city again determined. Communities rally to help hardest-hit neighborhoods like the Rockaways and Staten Island. Volunteers muck out basements, and new attention is paid to fortifying the city against climate threats. You'll see new floodwalls and sand dunes being constructed, a nod that the battle with nature is ongoing. By the end of the 2010s, New York stands as a bustling metropolis at its peak population, over 8.5 million. Crime is at lows not seen since the 1950s. The subways are, ironically, one of the main frustrations, aging infrastructure causing delays. But projects like the 2nd Avenue subway, opened 2017 after being conceived a century ago, show progress. The motif of continuity is exemplified in the New York City subway map. Old lines, some over 110 years old, still carrying modern multitudes. Riding a train from the Bronx through Manhattan to Brooklyn, you pass through time and culture. Latin music, then hushed book readers, then hip-hop beats leaking from headphones, all within one subway car. In the quiet of a recent evening, perhaps you find yourself at the 9/11 memorial. The day's tourists have left, and under the soft glow of path lights, the waterfalls roar with a steady grace. You notice the survivor tree, now a healthy flowering pear, its leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Nearby, One World Trade Center's spire glows red, white, and blue against the night sky. You feel a profound stillness in this spot that was once the scene of utter chaos. The Hudson River is just beyond, and you glimpse the lights of Hoboken reflected on its dark surface. A pair of blue lights, the tribute in light, might be visible if it's the anniversary, reaching up as if to touch the stars. In this moment, you feel all of New York's history converge. The sacred ground of the Lenape, the striving of millions of immigrants, the innovations, the art, the sorrows, and the celebrations. The city is a living entity, ever-changing yet anchored by enduring values of diversity, ambition, and community. As you step away, you hear in the distance the familiar city sounds, an uptown, a train rumbling in its tunnel, a ferry horn, a lone saxophonist playing on a corner perhaps. The melody echoes slightly, reminiscent of Gershwin's blues or a new street performer's riff, a lullaby for the city that never sleeps. Over more than 4 centuries, New York City has risen from a forested island called Manhattan to a soaring global city. It has been born and reborn, burned and rebuilt, battered and rejuvenated. And through it all, the Hudson River's tides flow in and out. The stars above continue their nightly vigil, and the footsteps of countless dreamers continue to ring out on its streets. New York's story is not a straight line, but a flowing river, with eddies and rapids, reflections and depths. Tonight, that river and the city beside it are at peace. The cycle of history and progress will continue with each new dawn. But for now, in this gentle night, the heartbeat of New York can be felt as a soothing rhythm. In the rustling trees of Central Park, the distant hum of a taxi on Fifth Avenue, the soft lap of harbor waves at the Staten Island ferry's dock. It is the sound of endurance, of millions of lives intertwined in a mighty urban tapestry. As you drift into sleep, you carry with you the immersive tapestry of New York's entire history. The scent of its early forests, the clang of its building steel, the jazz of its Harlem nights, the roar of its resilience, the whisper of its rebirths. The city that never sleeps will keep watch now, its bridges and towers standing guard. You are cradled by its endless story, a journey through time in a place unlike any other. And as the night deepens, New York's past and present meld into a gentle lullaby, promising that no matter what comes, this city's spirit, like the eternal Hudson, flows onward, strong and sure forever.